The earliest phase of human history began in Africa during the late Middle Pleistocene. Fossil and archaeological evidence show that the emergence of Homo sapiens was not a sudden event, but a gradual evolutionary process that unfolded across the African continent. One of the most significant early sites is Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. Fossils recovered there, dated to around 315,000 years ago using thermoluminescence and uranium series methods, display a combination of archaic and modern anatomical traits. These remains demonstrate that features associated with modern humans did not appear in a single region or at a single moment, but through a mosaic pattern of development. Another foundational site is the Homo Kaibish Formation in Ethiopia. Revised radiometric dating places the Homo I individual at roughly 230,000 years ago, although earlier assessments produced dates closer to 195,000 years. This range reflects ongoing refinement in dating techniques rather than uncertainty about its importance. Together, Jebel Irhoud and Homo Kaibish support the view that Homo sapiens evolved through interconnected populations within Africa, forming what many researchers describe as a Pan-African evolutionary system. Population size during this era remained limited. Genetic studies estimate an effective population size, likely in the tens of thousands, although the actual number of living individuals would have been larger and varied over time. These early humans lived in diverse environments, including savannas, coasts, highlands, and woodland regions. Their distribution shows that the species developed broad ecological tolerance early in its history. Stone tools form the primary archaeological record for this period. Many sites associated with early Homo sapiens contain Middle Stone Age industries, characterized by prepared core technologies such as the Levallois method. This approach required shaping a stone core to produce flakes of predictable size and form. While Levallois technology existed before Homo sapiens and continued through later periods, its presence during this phase indicates technological continuity across different regions of Africa. Some sites also show evidence of hafting, where stone points were attached to wooden shafts. Tools from Kathupan in southern Africa are a clear example of this multi-step production process. Hafting required planning and knowledge of adhesives, materials, and structural design, reflecting increasing behavioral sophistication. Fire was a consistent part of daily life. Burned stone concentrations, hearth structures, and charcoal deposits appear in multiple Middle Pleistocene sites. Earlier hominins mastered fire long before Homo sapiens emerged, but early modern humans maintained widespread and regular use of it. Cooking improved the digestibility of both plant and animal foods, though debates continue about how much this influenced biological evolution. Africa's climate during this period shifted repeatedly due to glacial, interglacial cycles. Marine isotope stages, MIS, which track global climate patterns, show that conditions varied between wetter and drier phases. These fluctuations affected river systems, vegetation zones, and animal distributions. During wetter periods, expanded lakes and grasslands supported larger populations. During drier intervals, humans retreated into ecological refugia, regions that remained relatively stable when surrounding environments deteriorated. Likely refugia included the Ethiopian highlands, the coast of southern Africa near sites such as Pinnacle Point, and regions around the Lake Victoria Basin. These areas provided more dependable resources during harsh climatic episodes. Subsistence strategies reflected this environmental variability. Evidence from coastal and inland sites shows that early Homo sapiens consumed a broad range of foods, including shellfish, fish, small mammals, larger game, roots, seeds, and plant materials. This adaptability reduced dependence on any single food source and supported survival across shifting climates. The presence of standardized blades, pointed flakes, and scraping tools indicates specialized activities such as hide processing and hunting. Pigment use appears intermittently in this early period. Ochre fragments recovered at several Middle Pleistocene sites demonstrate repeated processing of minerals, though the purposes remain unclear. These materials may have been used in hide treatments, adhesives, or other utilitarian tasks. Later and more clearly symbolic applications appear at sites such as Blombo's cave around 100,000 to 70,000 years ago, where engraved ochre pieces and organized pigment processing kits indicate deliberate symbolic or cultural activity. Early finds do not provide evidence of symbolism, but show that material processing skills were developing long before symbolic behavior became widespread. Homo sapiens lived in a world shared with other hominin species. Within Africa, archaic hominins persisted during overlapping time periods. Outside Africa, Neanderthals and Denisovans inhabited Europe and parts of Asia. During the time frame covered in this segment, Homo sapiens had not yet reached the regions occupied by these groups. Their presence, however, shows that the human lineage consisted of multiple contemporaneous populations adapted to different environments across the Old World. Social patterns from this period can be inferred from material evidence. The movement of stone raw materials across significant distances suggests long-term mobility or exchange between groups. These networks allowed resources and tool-making knowledge to spread beyond local territories. Genetic data also indicate population structure within Africa, meaning that early Homo sapiens communities were regionally distinct but shared ancestry and occasional gene flow. By about 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was well established across multiple African regions with a consistent set of biological and behavioral traits. The species occupied varied ecological zones, produced planned stone tools, maintained fire use, and demonstrated the flexibility needed to survive in unstable environments. These capabilities formed the foundation for later cultural developments and the eventual dispersal of humans beyond Africa. Between 200,000 and 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens remained entirely within Africa, navigating a long period defined by climatic instability, population fluctuations, and gradual cultural and technological development. This era sits between the earliest biological origins of the species and the later dispersal beyond Africa. It represents more than 130,000 years of adaptation to changing landscapes shaped by shifts in global climate systems. To understand this era, researchers rely on archaeology, paleoenvironmental studies, fossil evidence, and genetic data, which together show how human populations persisted through cycles of expansion and contraction. The climate framework for this period is structured around marine isotope stages, MIS. MIS 6, lasting from roughly 191,000 to 130,000 years ago, was a generally cold and arid interval. Conditions reduced habitable zones across Africa, limiting access to water and vegetation. MIS 5, beginning around 130,000 years ago, brought warmer temperatures and wetter environments across many regions. These oscillations shaped human movements, resource availability, and long-term population size. The archaeological record shows that Homo sapiens adjusted to these changes by shifting territories, altering subsistence strategies, and maintaining flexible social networks. During MIS 6, some regions became difficult to inhabit due to increased aridity. Paleo-environmental reconstructions indicate significant expansion of deserts in North Africa and contraction of freshwater systems. As a result, human populations likely concentrated in ecological refugia, areas that provided stable food and water. Evidence points to refugia in the Ethiopian highlands, the southern African coast near sites such as Pinnacle Point, and portions of East Africa around the Rift Valley lakes. These regions offered plant foods, marine resources, and consistent freshwater supplies during otherwise harsh conditions. Archaeological sites dating to MIS 6 show continuity in Middle Stone Age technologies, but also local innovation. Stone tool assemblages include prepared core technologies, blades, scrapers, and pointed flakes. At some sites, evidence for specialized tasks becomes clearer. For example, tools from Pork Epic Cave in Ethiopia, dated to around 78,000 years ago, but part of a broader technological sequence extending earlier, illustrate systematic production and use of stone points and blades. Though later than the core MIS 6 period, Pork Epic represents a long-standing technological tradition rooted in earlier phases. By MIS 5, climate conditions improved in many regions. Wetter environments expanded savanna zones and increased the distribution of large mammals. This allowed population growth and wider dispersal within Africa. Fossil evidence from sites such as Herdo in Ethiopia, dated to around 160,000 years ago using argon-argon methods, provides examples of fully anatomically modern humans during this time. The Herdo individuals show cranial features consistent with Homo sapiens, confirming the continuity of the species through these climatic transitions. Technological development during 200,000 to 70,000 BC progressed gradually. While major innovations such as microlithic tool industries and formal bone technology appear later, this era lays the foundation for them. Hafted points become more common, suggesting advancements in hunting strategies. Wooden or bone shafts rarely preserve in the archaeological record, but the wear patterns on stone points indicate use as spear tips. These tools allowed humans to target medium and large animals more efficiently across varied environments. Subsistence strategies expanded during this period. Sites along the southern African coast show consistent exploitation of marine resources, including shellfish and fish, indicating familiarity with coastal ecosystems. Inland sites reveal hunting of large mammals, such as antelope, and processing of plant foods. The combination of coastal and inland records demonstrates that Homo sapiens communities adapted to diverse ecologies rather than specializing narrowly in one type of environment. Pigment use continues in this period with more frequent and clearer examples. Ochre pieces from several Middle Stone Age sites show scraping, grinding, and scoring marks, meaning pigment was intentionally processed. At Kafsa Cave in the Levant, occupied by early Homo sapiens around 100,000 years ago, red ochre appears in association with burials. Though outside Africa, these finds reflect behavioral patterns that likely developed earlier within Africa during the MIS 5 warm phase. The exact functions of pigments remain varied and uncertain, but their repeated processing indicates organized activities requiring planning and selection of materials. Population genetics provides additional insight into this era. Studies of modern human DNA suggest that Homo sapiens populations underwent periods of growth and contraction that align with climatic cycles. The population may have expanded during MIS5, followed by reductions during later arid phases. These patterns indicate long-term regional structure within Africa. Different groups adapted to local environments and maintained distinct cultural and genetic identities while still exchanging genes through occasional contact. The archaeological record from North Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa shows both shared features and regional variation. For example, Nubian levallois technology, identified in Northeast Africa and parts of Arabia, demonstrates a specific method of preparing stone cores. In contrast, Southern African sites show early blade production and increased use of heat treatment in the later Stone Age, though systematic heat treatment begins later than this segment's timeframe. These differences reveal that technological change was not uniform, but dynamic and locally adapted. During this period, early Homo sapiens also began showing clearer signs of long-distance material movement. Stone types found tens of kilometers from their geological sources indicate either extended foraging ranges or exchange between groups. This connectivity likely played a role in maintaining genetic diversity and sharing knowledge across regions. It also suggests that early humans possessed the social flexibility needed to survive in environments that changed dramatically over time. By around 100,000 to 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens populations were more numerous and more widely distributed across Africa than in earlier phases. Fossils from sites such as Clayses River in South Africa and Skull and Kafza in the Levant show a wider geographic range for our species, even before the major dispersal that follows. Stone tools from these sites include advanced blade technologies and evidence of controlled fire use in hearths. The period ended around 70,000 years ago, just before the first major waves of Homo sapiens began expanding out of Africa. The long era from 200,000 to 70,000 BC established the behavioral, technological, and ecological capacities required for global dispersal. Populations had survived multiple glacial cycles, adapted to diverse environments, and maintained interconnected networks across the continent. Around 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens experienced one of the most significant transitions in human history, the first sustained expansions beyond Africa into the broader Old World. This dispersal followed more than 200,000 years of biological development, technological refinement, and adaptation to fluctuating African environments. The expansion was not a single event, but a series of movements influenced by climate, available routes, population dynamics, and ecological opportunities. Archaeological and genetic evidence together show that by 40,000 years ago, modern humans were present across large parts of Eurasia, Southeast Asia, and Australia, marking the beginning of global colonization. The environmental backdrop for this expansion corresponds to late marine isotope stage 4 and early MIS3. Around 70,000 years ago, climate conditions in Africa and adjacent regions changed in ways that influenced population movement. Parts of Northeast Africa experienced increased aridity, while some coastal and riverine routes remained viable corridors. Genetic studies indicate that a subset of African populations experienced a bottleneck during this period, reducing genetic diversity and concentrating ancestry among smaller groups. These populations form the ancestral source for most non-African humans today. One of the earliest well-supported routes for dispersal is the Southern Coastal Pathway. This route extends from the Horn of Africa across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which was narrower during periods of lower sea level, into the Arabian Peninsula. Archaeological sites in southern Arabia, such as Jebel Faya, contain Middle Stone Age, like technologies that resemble those found in eastern Africa. While dating of these sites varies, some evidence indicates human presence in Arabia around or soon after the 70,000-year mark. These populations likely followed coastal environments rich in marine resources, allowing reliable subsistence during movement. As groups continued eastward, they entered South Asia. Sites in India and Sri Lanka with stone tool assemblages dated to between 50,000 and 45,000 years ago demonstrate the presence of Homo sapiens across the subcontinent. Some of these tools reflect continuity with earlier local industries, indicating interaction between incoming Homo sapiens and previous hominin populations or adaptations to new ecological settings. Paleoenvironmental studies suggest that South Asia offered diverse habitats, including grasslands, river valleys, and coastal regions, which supported human occupation and dispersal. Further east, archaeological evidence indicates rapid movement into Southeast Asia and Australia. In Southeast Asia, Homo sapiens encountered varied ecosystems, including dense forests, river plains, and island archipelagos. By around 50,000 years ago, humans had reached Sahul, the combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea connected by lower sea levels. Sites such as Lake Mungo in Australia show human presence by at least 50,000 to 45,000 years ago, supported by radiocarbon and optically stimulated luminescence dating. The arrival in Sahul required water crossings, confirming that humans possessed the ability to construct watercraft or rafts capable of short sea voyages. As Homo sapiens expanded across Eurasia, they encountered earlier hominin populations, including Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia and Denisovans in Central and Eastern Asia. Genetic evidence demonstrates interbreeding between these groups and modern humans. Most non-African populations today retain between 1% and 2% Neanderthal-derived DNA, and some populations in Southeast Asia and Oceania retain Denisovan-related genetic contributions. These interactions occurred in multiple locations and times, indicating that early modern humans and other hominins overlapped for thousands of years before Neanderthals and most Denisovan groups disappeared. In Western Asia and Europe, human expansion occurred more gradually due to colder climates and competition for resources. Modern humans appear in the Levant at several earlier intervals, including around 120,000 to 90,000 years ago, but these early expansions were limited and did not lead to permanent settlement. The more sustained presence of Homo sapiens in the Levant dates to around 55,000 to 50,000 years ago. From there, humans moved into southeastern Europe and later into Central and Western Europe. In Europe, humans arrived at least 45,000 years ago. Sites such as Bacho Kiro in Bulgaria and Oase in Romania provide early fossil evidence of Homo sapiens in the region. The archaeological record includes blade technologies and bone points that differ from Neanderthal-associated industries, marking the beginning of a technological shift known as the initial Upper Paleolithic. Radiocarbon dating at multiple sites shows a gradual replacement of Neanderthal populations over several millennia. The disappearance of Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago is attributed to multiple factors, including climatic stress, small population size, and competition rather than a single cause. Technological changes accompanied this expansion. Stone tool industries associated with Homo sapiens evolved into forms emphasizing blades, points, and specialized tools. In many regions, humans adopted resource-specific technologies suited to local environments. In South Asia, microlithic industries appear around 45,000 years ago. In Australia, ground-edge axes appear early, representing a technological development not documented in Africa or Eurasia at that time. These regional variations demonstrate adaptation rather than a single universal toolkit. Subsistence strategies also diversified. Evidence from Southeast Asia shows exploitation of tropical forests, while remains from Australian sites indicate hunting of large marsupials and gathering of plant foods. Studies of residues on tools reveal processing of plants, including tubers and grass seeds, demonstrating flexible foraging strategies. In colder regions of Eurasia, humans hunted reindeer, horses, and other large mammals, often using coordinated approaches suggested by site organization and tool distribution patterns. Population genetics provides further insight into this expansion. Patterns of genetic variation outside Africa support a model in which a relatively small group of humans, possibly numbering a few thousand, form the founding populations of all non-African groups. As these populations migrated across continents, they accumulated adaptations to diverse climates and environments. For example, genetic variants related to high-altitude adaptation in Tibetans showed Denisovan contributions, while Neanderthal-derived variants influence immune system function in many populations today. By 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens occupied a geographic range stretching from North Africa to Western Europe, across Asia to Siberia, through Southeast Asia, and into Australia. These expansions set the stage for later movements into northern Eurasia, the Japanese archipelago, and eventually the Americas. Human populations across these regions remain small, but increasingly diverse in their cultural and technological expressions. Between 40,000 and 12,000 years ago, human societies across Eurasia, Africa, and Australia underwent a period of significant cultural and technological expansion. Archaeologists often refer to this period as the Upper Paleolithic in Eurasia and the Late Stone Age in Africa. Although the term cultural explosion is sometimes used to describe rapid increases in symbolic behavior, technological variability, and long-distance networks, the changes occurred at different rates in different regions. This segment traces developments strictly according to the archaeological record. Around 45,000 to 40,000 years ago, new tool industries emerged across Eurasia as Homo sapiens populations expanded. These industries, known as the initial Upper Paleolithic and later the early Upper Paleolithic, included blade-based technologies, bone points, antler tools, and ivory artifacts. Sites such as Bacho Kiro in Bulgaria, dated to around 45,000 years ago, provide some of the earliest evidence for Homo sapiens working with bone and producing personal ornaments in Europe. Radiocarbon dates from these layers demonstrate that modern humans had established themselves in southeastern Europe by this time. By 40,000 years ago, more complex symbolic artifacts appeared in several regions. In Europe, cave sites such as Chauvet in France contain paintings dated by radiocarbon and uranium series methods to between 36,000 and 30,000 years ago. These include detailed representations of animals such as horses, rhinos, and lions. The pigments, Application techniques and placement patterns provide evidence of organized cultural practices rather than spontaneous expression. Lascaux and Altamira, dated later, around 20,000 to 14,000 years ago, continue this tradition with complex scenes, hand stencils, and engraved panels. In Africa, symbolic and technological developments continue alongside or earlier than Eurasian examples. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, engraved ochre and shell beads date to between 100,000 and 70,000 years ago, but during this segment, additional innovations appear. Sites such as Apollo 11 Cave in Namibia contain painted slabs dated to roughly 30,000 years ago. Microlithic technologies, small, carefully shaped stone tools often used as components of composite hunting weapons, appear across southern and eastern Africa by around 25,000 years ago, marking an important shift toward flexible toolkits optimized for varied environments. Australia, which humans reached at least 50,000 years ago, shows a distinct archaeological pattern during this period. Ground-edge axes, absent from Africa and Europe at comparable dates, appear in northern Australia around 35,000 to 30,000 years ago. These tools indicate technological adaptation to forested environments. Rock art traditions also developed in several regions of Australia, though dating is complex. Some examples from Arnhem Land may date to this general time range based on associated sediments and stylistic sequences. Across Europe and Northern Asia, the Upper Paleolithic also includes evidence of advanced hunting technologies. Spear throwers, known as otlotls, and possibly early forms of bow and arrow systems appear toward the latter part of this period, though securely dated examples vary by region. Bone and antler points increase in frequency, and tool specialization becomes pronounced. Sites across Siberia show humans adapting to cold environments by hunting reindeer, mammoth, and horse, using strategies inferred from faunal remains and site organization. Long-distance movement of materials increases significantly during this period. Obsidian sourced from hundreds of kilometers away appears at sites in the Near East. Marine shells found far inland in Europe and Africa demonstrate exchange networks or long-distance travel. Ivory and exotic stone materials are transported across regions, suggesting consistent social contacts between groups. Population densities rose in some areas, supported by improved hunting efficiency and broader resource use. Burial practices provide further evidence for cultural complexity. At Sungur in Russia, burials dated to around 34,000 years ago contain individuals interred with thousands of ivory beads, spears, and ornaments. The precision with which these beads were shaped indicates significant labor investment. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dated to around 30,000 years ago, evidence includes fired clay figurines, textile impressions, and structured dwellings made from mammoth bones. These materials show that Homo sapiens created diverse forms of portable and durable artifacts, reflecting organized production methods rather than isolated events. In Western Asia, cultural variability appears in parallel. The Levant hosts traditions such as the Almerian and Levantine orignation, dated between 40,000 and 25,000 years ago, which include blade tools and personal ornamentation. Genetic studies suggest that Eurasian populations during this period exchanged genes over large territories, with movements linking populations from the Levant to Europe and parts of Central Asia. Climate continued to influence human settlement patterns. The period includes the last glacial maximum, LGM, occurring between about 26,500 and 19,000 years ago. During the LGM, colder global temperatures expanded ice sheets across northern Europe and North America. In many parts of Eurasia, vegetation shifted to cold steppe environments. Populations contracted into refugia such as southern Europe, the Caucasus, and parts of Western Asia. Archaeological evidence from sites in Spain, Italy, and the Balkans shows continuity of occupation during this cold interval. After the LGM, populations expanded again as temperatures rose and vegetation zones shifted northward. The spread of microlithic technologies becomes increasingly visible after the LGM. In Europe, geometric microliths appear in epipaleolithic cultures such as the Azilian and the late glacial industries of northern Europe. In Africa, microlithic toolkits appear earlier and show continuity after 40,000 years ago. These small, efficient tools could be mounted in wooden shafts or used as cutting implements, giving humans flexible and adaptable equipment suited to changing environments. In Asia, this period includes the earliest known settlement of northern Siberia. Sites such as Yana RHS, dated to about 32,000 years ago using radiocarbon techniques, show that humans had reached high-latitude Arctic environments. These populations hunted large mammals and constructed shelters adapted to sub-zero conditions. By 20,000 to 15,000 years ago, humans occupied much of northern Asia, establishing the foundations for later migration into the Americas. By 16,000 to 14,000 years ago, humans expanded further into previously unoccupied regions. This time frame marks the earliest securely dated human presence in the Americas, continuing the pattern of global expansion begun in Segment 3. The details of this migration are covered later, but its origins lie in the technological and ecological adaptations developed during this broader cultural expansion. Across all continents except Antarctica, human populations between 40,000 and 12,000 years ago demonstrated increasing technological flexibility, symbolic expression, and social connectivity. These changes were not simultaneous or uniform, but formed the basis for later developments in settlement, subsistence, and cultural life. The period concludes with humans established across Africa, Eurasia, Australia, and the Americas, entering the final phase before the transition to agriculture. Between 20,000 and 12,000 BC, human societies across the world experienced substantial environmental, technological, and demographic changes. This period marks the transition from the last glacial maximum, LGM, toward the more stable climate of the early Holocene. The changes did not immediately produce agriculture or permanent villages, but they created the ecological and social conditions that made later developments possible. Archaeological evidence from Africa, Eurasia, Australia, and the Americas shows how human groups reorganized their subsistence strategies, settlement patterns, and technologies in response to shifting environments. The last glacial maximum reached its peak around 26,500 to 19,000 years ago. During this interval, global temperatures were significantly lower than today, and major ice sheets covered large portions of North America and Northern Europe. Sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, exposing continental shelves and expanding coastal plains. For humans, the LGM imposed constraints on movement and survival in some regions, while opening new opportunities in others. Cold steppe and tundra environments spread across Eurasia, supporting large herds of megafauna such as mammoth, reindeer, bison, and horse. Archaeological sites from Eastern Europe and Siberia show that human populations adapted to these ecosystems through specialized hunting strategies and multi-season camps. As the climate warmed after 19,000 BC, the ice sheets began to retreat. This warming was not uniform. It occurred in pulses influenced by shifts in atmospheric and oceanic circulation. The period between 17,000 and 14,700 BC marks the onset of significant deglaciation. Sea levels gradually rose, reshaping coastlines and reducing the exposed shelves that had served as migration routes during the LGM. In many parts of the world, vegetation zones shifted northward or upslope, and ecological diversity increased. These environmental changes contributed to new patterns of human settlement. In the Near East, particularly in the Levant, archaeological sites associated with the Natufian culture appear around 12,500 BC. Although this lies at the end of the segment, the social tendencies that produced these sites began earlier. Natufian sites such as Ain Malaha and Wadi Hamma show semi-sedentary structures, including stone foundations and prepared floors. The presence of ground stone tools, mortars, and pestles indicates increased processing of wild cereals such as barley and wheat. These developments reflect a gradual intensification of plant use, although cultivation and domestication had not yet begun. Earlier precursors to this trend appear across Southwest Asia. Hunter-gatherer groups established repeated seasonal camps, returned to the same locations annually, and constructed more substantial shelters than those known from the early Upper Paleolithic. These camps often included storage pits for nuts, seeds, and other storable foods. The consistent reuse of particular locations marks an important shift toward territorial familiarity and resource mapping. Archaeologists interpret these behaviors as steps toward sedentism. Africa shows similar, though regionally distinct, transitions. In North Africa, sites such as Tafrilt in Morocco, dated between 15,000 and 12,000 BC, contain burials, stone tools, and evidence of plant processing. Microlithic toolkits dominate many African regions during this period. These tools, often mounted on wooden shafts, reflect flexible hunting systems suited to increasingly varied environments. In Eastern Africa, changes in lake levels influenced human settlement. Rising waters created productive shorelines that supported fishing, gathering, and hunting activities. In southern Africa, sites such as Bumplas and Bushman Rock Shelter demonstrate long-term occupation sequences during the late Pleistocene. Artifact assemblages include backed microliths and grinding stones, indicating diversified subsistence strategies that incorporated plant resources, small mammals, and coastal foods depending on regional conditions. The presence of diverse toolkits indicates that populations adjusted their foraging strategies based on local ecological opportunities. In Europe, the end of the LGM brought significant changes to human settlement patterns. As the ice receded, populations expanded into regions previously uninhabitable. Archaeological cultures such as the Magdalenian, dated to roughly 17,000 to 12,000 BC, appear across Western and Central Europe. Magdalenian sites provide evidence of organized hunting, sophisticated bone and antler tools, and portable art. Faunal remains show targeted hunting of species such as reindeer, horse, and red deer. Blade and microlith technologies increased efficiency and supported complex toolkits prepared for specialized tasks. Portable art objects from Magdalenian sites, including carved antler pieces, ivory figurines, and engraved stones, reflect consistent symbolic traditions across broad regions. These objects differ from earlier cave art traditions, but show continuity in symbolic expression. Some Magdalenian sites contain evidence of structures made from bone and wood, suggesting temporary dwellings suited for seasonal mobility. In Siberia, late Pleistocene groups continued to occupy Arctic and subarctic environments. Sites such as Ushki Lake in Kamchatka and sites along the Yenisei River show continuity in microblade technologies. These groups relied on hunting large mammals and used composite tools to maximize efficiency in cold climates. Their presence in far northeastern Asia set the stage for the eventual migration into the Americas. The Americas saw significant developments during this period, although human presence began earlier. By around 16,000 to 14,000 BC, archaeological evidence from sites such as Monte Verde in Chile demonstrates human occupation in South America. These early populations likely used coastal corridors and inland routes made accessible as ice sheets retreated. Toolkits from this early period vary regionally, but often include unifacial stone tools and evidence of plant and marine resource use. By 12,000 BC, populations had expanded across large portions of North and South America, adapting to diverse ecological zones including forests, plains, mountains, and coasts. Technological diversification marks this era across continents. Composite tools made with microliths became widespread, enhancing hunting accuracy and efficiency. Groundstone tools appear more frequently, especially in regions where plant processing gained importance. Fishing technologies developed in riverine and coastal areas, including bone harpoons and barbed points. These innovations reflect adaptive responses to changing environments rather than sudden cultural revolutions. The final millennia of this segment, 12,000 to 10,000 BC, marked the transition toward the Holocene. Global temperatures rose sharply, glaciers retreated, and sea levels continued to climb. Vegetation zones shifted rapidly, producing new ecological opportunities across the Near East, Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Human settlement patterns became increasingly stable in some regions as groups returned to the same resource-rich areas year after year. By 12,000 BC, the stage was set for fundamental changes in human society. Semi-sedentary communities existed in several regions. Plant processing had intensified, and storage practices were widespread. Although domestication had not yet begun, the patterns of behavior that would lead to agriculture were already present. Between 12,000 and 900 BC, major transformations in human subsistence and settlement patterns occurred across several regions of the world. These changes did not form a single, unified revolution, but instead represented independent developments in different ecological settings. Archaeological research shows that the shift from purely mobile foraging to more intensive management of plants and animals began gradually. The period marks the beginning of what scholars identify as early agricultural systems, although full domestication required several millennia. The regions involved include the Fertile Crescent in Southwest Asia, the Yangtze and Yellow River regions of China, the highlands of New Guinea, the African Sahel and West Africa, Mesoamerica, and the Andes. In the Near East, particularly within the Levant, northern Mesopotamia, and southeastern Anatolia, pre-agricultural societies had already begun to display sedentary behavior during the Natufian period. By around 12,000 BC, These communities used semi-permanent structures, groundstone tools, and storage facilities. Archaeological sites such as Jerf El Almar, Abu Huraira, and Göbekli Tepe provide evidence of sedentary or semi-sedentary populations supported by intensive gathering of wild cereals. Archaeobotanical remains show the systematic exploitation of wild barley, Hordeum spontaneum, wild wheat, Triticum dicocoides, lentils, and other plants. During this period, environmental changes associated with the end of the Pleistocene, including increased rainfall and warmer temperatures, created conditions favorable for the growth of wild cereals across the Fertile Crescent. Around 10,500 to 9,500 BC, morphological changes began to appear in some cereal species, indicating the early stages of domestication. These changes include tougher rakish structures, which prevent seeds from dispersing naturally, and alterations in seed size. While full domestication was not complete by 900 BC, the transition from wild harvesting to deliberate cultivation had begun. Human groups increasingly invested labor in preparing plots, clearing vegetation, and managing plant growth cycles. Grinding stones, sickle blades with characteristic sheen from cutting grasses, and storage installations support this interpretation. Parallel developments occurred in Eastern Asia. In the Yangtze River Basin, evidence for early rice management appears around 10,000 BC. At sites such as Shangshan and later Kuaokio, rice remains show increasing grain size and changes in spikelet bases associated with the early stages of domestication. The wetland environments of the lower Yangtze provided predictable resources, encouraging more stable settlement patterns. In the Yellow River Basin, millet exploitation became increasingly important. Sites such as Nanzhuangtu and Sishan, dated slightly later, indicate that these early Holocene communities processed and stored plant foods extensively. Although the major domestication phases of Chinese cereals occurred closer to 900 to 700 BC, the foundational behaviors were established during this segment. In the New Guinea highlands, archaeological research identifies early plant cultivation systems distinct from those in Eurasia. The Kook Swamp site provides evidence of drainage channels, mounded garden beds, and other landscape modifications dated between 10,000 and 900 BC. These features suggest deliberate management of taro, bananas, and yams, plants suited to New Guinea's tropical highland environment. Unlike cereal-based systems, New Guinea agriculture focused on root and tree crops, demonstrating that agricultural origins varied according to regional ecology. In Africa, multiple regions began plant management during this period. In the Sahel, evidence from sites such as Aunjugu in Mali indicates early processing of wild grasses and the beginning of cultivation behaviors around 10,000 BC. Sorghum and pearl millet, later major staples, show early exploitation patterns in this region, though full domestication occurred millennia later. In northeastern Africa, wild sorghum and other grasses were harvested using grindstones and microlithic sickle components. Pollen and phytolith analyses from lake cores in the Sahara reveal that wetter early Holocene conditions expanded grasslands, facilitating intensive plant use. Animal domestication also began to take shape during this era. In the Fertile Crescent, communities continued hunting gazelle, wild cattle, aurochs, wild goats, and wild sheep, but some archaeological sites show signs of selective hunting of younger or male animals, suggesting early management practices. While full domestication of sheep and goats occurred later, around 9000 to 8500 BC. The behavioral patterns leading to domestication emerged during this segment. Increased familiarity with herd structures and seasonal movements laid the groundwork for intentional breeding and controlled grazing. In the Americas, early plant management began in several regions. In Mesoamerica, archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that teosinte, the wild ancestor of maize, was already exploited by around 9000 BC, although the morphological transition into domesticated maize occurred later. Early squash domestication began approximately 10,000 BC in regions such as the Guelanacuitz Cave in present-day Mexico. Macrofossil remains show distinctive changes in rind thickness and seed size characteristic of domestication. These findings demonstrate that plant domestication in the Americas proceeded independently of developments in Eurasia and Africa. In the Andes, evidence for early potato and quinoa management appears slightly after this segment's primary range, but the foundations are present earlier. By 10,000 to 9,000 BC, high-altitude foragers exploited plant species that would later be domesticated. Faunal records show hunting of camelids, such as guanaco and vicuña, species that would eventually be domesticated as llamas and alpacas. Technological changes accompanied these subsistence shifts. Groundstone tools became increasingly common worldwide, including mortars, pestles, querns, and grinding slabs. These tools indicate a significant investment in plant processing. Polished stone axes appear in regions where forest clearance became necessary for cultivation. Sickles, often composed of microlithic inserts set into bone or wood handles, appear across the Near East and Africa. Storage technology has also developed rapidly. Pit silos, lined storage rooms, and basketry containers appear in archaeological contexts dated between 12,000 and 9000 BC. Settlement patterns reflect these economic changes. While many communities remained mobile, others established long-term seasonal or semi-sedentary camps. In the Fertile Crescent, communities such as those at Abu Huraira demonstrate continuous occupation sequences with increasing investment in built structures. In East Asia, early Holocene communities established stable settlements near river valleys, where predictable annual flooding created fertile soils. Climate played a central role in these developments. The transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene brought warmer temperatures and increased precipitation in many regions. Forests expanded in some areas, while grasslands stabilized in others. These environmental changes supported larger populations and encouraged the more intensive use of plant and animal resources. The Younger Dryas, a brief return to cold conditions between about 10,900 and 9,700 BC, disrupted this trend temporarily, causing some populations to adjust mobility patterns or rely more heavily on stored foods. In the Near East, the Younger Dryas may have accelerated the shift from gathering to cultivating cereals, as declining availability of wild stands pushed communities toward deliberate planting. By 900 BC, the foundations of agriculture were firmly established in several regions. No region had yet completed the full domestication process, but the necessary behaviors, cultivation, selective harvesting, storage, and landscape modification were widespread. Between 900 and 5000 BC, human societies underwent critical transitions that produced the first villages, regular surplus production, and increasingly complex social structures. These developments did not occur simultaneously worldwide, but emerged independently in several regions where earlier cultivation, resource intensification, and demographic growth had already taken root. Archaeological records from Southwest Asia, East Asia, Africa, the Americas, and parts of Oceania show how early agricultural and semi-agricultural populations reorganized their settlement systems, technologies, and community life. In the Fertile Crescent, fully domesticated cereal species such as einkorn wheat, emmer wheat, and barley appear by around 8500 to 8000 BC. Sites associated with the pre-pottery Neolithic A, PPNA, and pre-pottery Neolithic B, PPNB, cultures show clear evidence of permanent or semi-permanent architectural traditions. At Jericho, Tel Es Sultan, round and later rectangular structures built from mud brick indicate long-term occupation. Radiocarbon dating places some of these constructions in the 900 to 8500 BC range. The presence of plastered floors, storage bins, and hearths points to domestic spaces maintained over many generations. In southeastern Anatolia, Kaonu, dated to around 8500 to 7500 BC, shows planned architectural layouts and specialized buildings associated with communal activities. Similarly, Catalhoyuk in central Anatolia, dated to 7400 to 6000 BC, represents one of the largest Neolithic settlements known from this period. Its densely packed mud brick houses, wall paintings, built platforms, and storage rooms provide a detailed record of daily life. Excavations reveal that inhabitants processed cereals, legumes, and animal products using ground stone tools, mortars, and large storage vessels. Domestication of animals progressed during this period. By around 8500 to 8000 BC, goats and sheep were fully domesticated in the Zagros foothills and surrounding regions. These domestications are identifiable by changes in age and sex distributions of animal remains, as well as morphological shifts in bone structure. Cattle domestication occurred later but began in multiple regions, including the Near East, by roughly 6500 BC. The integration of domestic animals increased food stability, provided secondary products such as milk, and contributed to the development of durable surpluses. In the Near East, early irrigation systems began to appear in small-scale forms. Although large-scale irrigation would develop later, Neolithic communities constructed channels and flood retention features near settlement sites to support crops during dry seasons. The expansion of farming facilitated population growth. Demographic estimates based on site size, density of structures, and burial numbers indicate significantly larger communities than those of earlier periods. In East Asia, parallel developments unfolded. Millet cultivation in the Yellow River Basin intensified between 8000 and 6000 BC. Sites such as Palagang show permanent structures, storage pits, and pottery production. In the Yangtze Basin, rice farming became more stable and widespread. Early domestic rice dating to around 700 BC appears at sites such as Himudu and later Majayabang, though the earliest phases of rice domestication trace back to the 900 to 800 BC period. These early East Asian villages produced pottery, tools made from polished stone, and ornaments crafted from bone and shell. Storage pits and consistent patterns of refuse disposal indicate sedentary lifeways. In the New Guinea highlands, early agricultural systems continued to evolve. The Cook Swamp site, with archaeological deposits dating from 800 to 6000 BC, shows extensive ditch systems, draining wetlands for plant cultivation. While the primary crops differed from those in Eurasia, taro, bananas, and yams, the degree of landscape modification confirms long-term horticultural practices. These systems supported stable populations but did not yet create the large village structures characteristic of Southwest Asia and East Asia. Africa also saw developments in plant and animal management during this period. In northeastern Africa, wild cattle management preceded domestication, with evidence from Nabta Playa and nearby regions in the Sahara showing structured camps, stone features, and intensive use of wild resources between 800 and 1600 BC. As climate conditions shifted during the early Holocene African humid period, the Sahara contained lakes, grasslands, and wetlands that supported semi-sedentary groups. Groundstone tools and pottery appear in regions such as the Central Sahara and the Nile Valley during this period. In the Sahel and West Africa, early cultivation of sorghum and pearl millet remained at a pre-domestication stage but showed intensifying use. In the Americas, early village formation took place later than in Eurasia, but foundational patterns emerged in this segment. In Mesoamerica, domesticated squash appears around 800 BC, followed by early maize cultivation between 700 and 1600 BC. These developments were accompanied by grinding stones, microblade tools, and small seasonal settlements. In the Andes, early forms of plant management, precursors to potato and quinoa domestication, appear by 700 BC. Faunal exploitation of camelids also continued to increase. Technological change marks this segment strongly. Pottery production became widespread across the world where resources and settlement patterns supported it. The earliest pottery in East Asia dates to well before this segment, but by 700 BC, pottery was common in China, Japan's Jomon culture, Siberia, and parts of Southeast Asia. In the Near East, pottery production begins during the latter part of this segment, around 700 to 1600 BC, marking the transition from the pre-pottery Neolithic to the pottery Neolithic. Polished stone tools, especially ground stone axes, appear across multiple regions. These tools were essential for clearing vegetation around early settlements and managing fields. Grinding stones, querns, and mortars became central to daily subsistence because cereals required substantial processing before consumption. Storage technology has expanded significantly. Underground silos, lined pits, large stone or ceramic containers, and woven baskets appear in archaeological layers. The ability to store food over long periods reduced the risks associated with seasonal fluctuations and enabled communities to maintain larger, stable populations. Surplus production became a structural feature of many societies, not an occasional outcome. Social complexity also began to increase. Burials in many Neolithic sites showed differentiation in grave goods, suggesting status variation within communities. Figurines made of clay, stone, or bone appear in Southwest Asian, European, and East Asian contexts. While interpretations vary, their widespread appearance suggests organized cultural practices. Community architecture evolved as well. In the Near East and parts of Europe, rectangular houses replaced earlier round structures, improving interior space organization. Some settlements show evidence of shared structures, possibly used for storage, rituals, or meetings. By 5000 BC, the foundations of fully developed agricultural societies were firmly in place across several continents. Permanent villages existed in the Near East, East Asia, and parts of Africa and the Americas. Population densities increased, social structures diversified, and technological innovation accelerated. These developments formed the basis for the emergence of towns, early states, and complex economies in the next phase of human history. Between 3500 and 2500 BC, human societies in several regions transitioned from village-based agricultural communities into the earliest urban and state-level civilizations. This transformation occurred independently in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and northern China. These developments included the emergence of cities, centralized governance, monumental architecture, administrative systems, and the first writing technologies. Archaeological records from these regions provide clear evidence for increasing population density, economic specialization, long-distance trade, and formalized institutions. In southern Mesopotamia, the alluvial plains formed by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers supported a dense network of agricultural settlements throughout the 6th and 5th millennia BC. By around 3500 BC, the settlement of Uruk expanded into what is widely recognized as one of the world's first cities, with an estimated population reaching into the tens of thousands. Excavations in the Iana and Anu districts reveal monumental temples, administrative buildings, and large storage facilities constructed from mud brick. The spatial organization of Uruk demonstrates planned religious, economic, and political functions. During this period, the Uruk culture developed advanced irrigation systems, supporting surplus grain production needed to sustain urban populations. Administrative practices became increasingly complex. Clay tokens, bully, and impressed seals served as early accounting tools before the appearance of true writing. By around 3300 to 3200 BC, cuneiform writing emerged in Uruk. The earliest tablets record economic transactions, lists of commodities, and administrative data. Signs were initially pictographic but became stylized over time, reflecting the growing need for standardized communication. The rise of cities in Mesopotamia also corresponded with expanded craft specialization. Workshops produced pottery, textiles, metal tools, and decorative objects. Evidence of long-distance trade includes imported materials such as copper from Oman, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and timber from the Levant. These items indicate economic interdependence across regions. Social stratification is visible in differentiated burials, administrative seals, and the size and location of residential structures. In Egypt, early state formation followed a different environmental and social trajectory. The Nile Valley's predictable flood cycles supported agricultural intensification beginning in the 6th millennium BC. By around 3500 BC, regional chiefdoms developed in Upper Egypt, including Naqada and Hierakonpolis. Archaeological evidence from Hierakonpolis includes large ceremonial complexes, elite burials, and specialized craft production. These chiefdoms competed and consolidated power over time. Unification of Upper and Lower Egypt occurred around 3100 BC, establishing the first dynasty under a ruler traditionally identified as Narmer. The Narmer palette, an important archaeological artifact dated to this period, depicts symbolic representations of unification. Early dynastic Egypt saw the development of centralized administration, taxation systems, and state-sponsored construction projects. Writing in the form of early hieroglyphs appears on ceremonial objects and administrative labels by this time. Unlike Mesopotamian writing, which originated in economic administration, Egyptian hieroglyphs developed within a combined ceremonial and administrative context. Monumental construction began in the early dynastic period and expanded significantly during the Old Kingdom, beginning around 2686 BC. Although this lies slightly beyond Segment 8's upper boundary, foundations for these developments, including administrative control of labor, resource logistics, and specialized craft production, were established during 3500 to 2500 BC. In the Indus Valley, the foundations of urban development formed during the early Harappan phase. Settlements such as Mehrgarh, first occupied thousands of years earlier, gradually expanded their agricultural and craft production capacities. By around 3300 BC, early urban centers such as Khat Diji, Omri, and early Harappa showed plan layouts, mud brick platforms, and standardized weights. Trade networks extended across the region, connecting communities in Baluchistan, Punjab, Gujarat, and along the Indus River system. By 2600 BC, the very end of this segment, the mature Harappan civilization began to take shape, though its major urban centers fully developed slightly later. Even during the early Harappan period, evidence shows clear specialization in pottery production, bead making, copper smelting, and shell ornament crafting. Long-distance trade with Mesopotamia is attested by the presence of Indus seals and objects in Sumerian sites. Agricultural diversity included wheat, barley, and, later, the earliest stages of cotton cultivation. In northern China, early state formation was emerging by the late 4th and early 3rd millennium BC. The Yangshao and Longshan cultures provide key evidence. The Longshan culture, beginning around 3000 BC, demonstrates increasing social complexity, including walled settlements, elite burials, and specialized ceramic production. The appearance of rammed earth architecture marks an important technological step. While writing in China appears later, during the Shang dynasty around 1250 BC, the institutional and social foundations that would support early states were forming during this period. Across multiple regions, metallurgy advanced significantly during this millennium. Copper smelting became more widespread, and alloy experiments led to the earliest forms of bronze production. Although true Bronze Age civilizations emerged in the following segment, the technologies of metal extraction, casting, and toolmaking progressed steadily during 3500 to 2500 BC. Metal tools and ornaments circulated widely through long-distance trade routes. Social and political organization changed substantially. Archaeological indicators of hierarchy include increasing variation in house size, specialized administrative buildings, elaborate burial goods, and control of labor for construction projects. Religious and ceremonial centers emerged as focal points for community identity and political authority. Temples in Mesopotamia, ceremonial complexes in Egypt, and elite structures in the Indus Valley demonstrate the institutionalization of ritual and governance. Urban planning became more systematic. In Mesopotamia, standardized bricks and measurement systems facilitated construction. In the Indus Valley, settlements were laid out on grid patterns with drainage systems. In Egypt, centralized storage and administrative facilities reflect the ability to mobilize and manage agricultural surpluses. Population sizes grew significantly compared to earlier periods. Estimates for Uruk's population range between 25,000 and 40,000 inhabitants, depending on density calculations. Egyptian regional centers grew into tens of thousands as well. These demographic increases reflect the intensification of agriculture and the capacity of early states to organize labor and resources. By 2500 BC, the world contained multiple regions with cities, administrative structures, writing systems, standardized economic production, and long-distance trade. Human societies had moved far beyond the small-scale, village-based systems of the early Neolithic. These developments set the stage for the rise of Bronze Age states and empires. Between 2500 and 1200 BC, human societies across Eurasia, North Africa, and parts of South Asia entered a phase characterized by metallurgy, wide-ranging trade networks, administrative sophistication, and the emergence of the earliest territorial empires. Bronze, a metal alloy created primarily by combining copper and tin, became the technological foundation of this era. Although the composition of bronze varied by region, its durability and workability supported advances in agriculture, warfare, and craft production. Alongside these technological developments, systems of writing expanded, regional economies grew, and long-distance trade connected regions thousands of kilometers apart. In Mesopotamia, the early dynastic period, circa 2900 to 2350 BC, transitioned into the world's first large territorial empire under Sargon of Akkad around 2334 BC. The Akkadian Empire unified Sumerian and northern Mesopotamian city-states, extending control from the Persian Gulf to northern Syria. Administrative tablets from this period record standardized taxation, rationing systems, and organized labor. Bronze tools and weapons were produced in large quantities, supporting both agricultural productivity and military expansion. The empire maintained communication routes and established administrative centers throughout its territory. Although the empire collapsed around 2154 BC due to internal strain and incursions by highland groups such as the Gutians, its administrative models influenced later states. Following the Akkadians, the third dynasty of UR3, beginning around 2112 BC, created another centralized state structure. The UR3 kings implemented detailed record-keeping involving agricultural yields, livestock counts, labor allocations, and building projects. Clay tablets from this period form one of the most extensive administrative archives of the ancient world. Settlement patterns during UR3 reflect a high degree of urbanization supported by irrigation agriculture. In Egypt, the Old Kingdom had already formed a unified polity by the end of Segment 8. By 2500 BC, pyramid construction reached its peak with the reigns of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure of the Fourth Dynasty. These projects required extensive administrative planning, labor coordination, and specialized craft production. After the Old Kingdom's decline around 2181 BC, Egypt entered the First Intermediate Period, followed by reunification in the Middle Kingdom around 2055 BC. The Middle Kingdom brought increased agricultural development, expansion of administrative boundaries, and construction of fortified sites in Nubia to secure trade routes and mineral resources. In the Indus Valley, the mature Harappan civilization flourished between roughly 2600 and 1900 BC, reaching its peak during the early portion of this segment. Major urban centers such as Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dhalavira, and Gannarawala displayed standardized weights, baked brick architecture, grid-planned streets, and advanced drainage systems. These cities relied on complex craft industries, including bead making, copper metallurgy, and shell ornament production. Trade connections extended westward to Mesopotamia, evidenced by Indus seals found in Sumerian contexts and textual references to a region called Meluha, often identified with the Indus region. Harappan decline after 1900 BC involved urban contraction, changing river patterns, and shifts in agricultural practices, though the population did not disappear. In China, the Longshan culture, flourishing between 3000 and 1900 BC, laid the foundation for early state formation. By the Erlitou period, circa 1900 to 1500 BC, bronze working had become significant in the Yellow River region. Erlitou is often associated with the early Bronze Age in China, featuring palatial structures, elite burials, and controlled production of bronze vessels and tools. The site shows evidence of organized urban layouts, specialized workshops, and centralized authority. Although writing systems in China appear later with the Shang dynasty, circa 1250 BC, the institutional structures supporting early states were present during this period. The Eastern Mediterranean and Anatolia saw the rise of several important Bronze Age powers. The Hittite kingdom emerged in central Anatolia around 1700 BC, eventually forming a major state controlling territories across Anatolia and northern Syria. The use of chariot-based warfare, diplomatic correspondence, and law codes characterizes Hittite statecraft. Archives from Hattusa, the Hittite capital, contain thousands of tablets documenting treaties, religious practices, and administrative matters. In the Levant and Eastern Mediterranean, city-states such as Byblos, Ugarit, and Ebla participated in extensive trade networks. Ugarit, located on the Syrian coast, provides a particularly rich archaeological record, including cuneiform archives documenting trade with Cyprus, Anatolia, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. These documents reveal a tightly connected Bronze Age economic world relying on metals, timber, textiles, and agricultural goods. The Aegean region experienced its own trajectory of development through the early Minoan and Cycladic cultures. By around 2000 BC, the Minoan civilization on Crete developed palatial centers such as Knossos, Phaistos, and Malea. These complexes contained storage magazines, workshops, administrative rooms, and ceremonial spaces. Minoan maritime activity connected Crete with Egypt, the Levant, and mainland Greece. The Linear A script, appearing around 1800 BC, indicates administrative complexity, although its language remains undeciphered. Bronze Age trade networks extended across thousands of kilometers. Tin, essential for producing bronze, was sourced from regions including Central Asia, Anatolia, and possibly Afghanistan. Copper traveled from sources in Oman, Cyprus, and the Caucasus. Maritime routes connected the Eastern Mediterranean with the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, and Indus region. Overland caravan routes carried goods across Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Central Asia. In Africa, early states did not yet form beyond Egypt, but significant cultural developments occurred. In Nubia, the Kerma culture flourished between 2500 and 1500 BC, forming one of sub-Saharan Africa's earliest centralized societies. Kerma controlled trade routes linking Egypt, Central Africa, and the Red Sea. Archaeological evidence includes large burial tumuli, specialized workshops, and fortified structures. In Europe, Bronze Age societies began to emerge in regions such as the Danube Basin, the Aegean, and the British Isles. Metallurgy developed independently in several regions by 2500 BC. The bell beaker culture spread across Europe influencing burial practices, pottery styles, and metal technologies. By 2000 to 1500 BC, large burial mounds, fortified settlements, and complex trade systems appeared across Europe. Amber from the Baltic reached the Mediterranean, and copper from the Alps traveled widely. Throughout this period, writing systems expanded. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform was used for economic, legal, literary, and religious texts. In Egypt, hierarchical administration used hieroglyphs for monumental inscriptions and hieratic script for daily records. In the Eastern Mediterranean, the Cypro-Minoan script and early alphabetic systems emerged toward the end of this period, although their development continued into later eras. The Bronze Age world reached a high degree of interconnection by 1300 to 1200 BC. Empires, kingdoms, and city-states engaged in diplomacy, documented in archives such as the Amarna letters, 14th century BC, which record exchanges between Egypt, Babylon, Hutti, Mitanni, and smaller Levantine polities. These letters detail gift-giving, marriage alliances, and disputes over territorial boundaries. Between 1200 and 800 BC, large parts of the Eastern Mediterranean, Near East, and South Asia underwent significant disruptions that restructured political, economic, and cultural landscapes. This period, commonly referred to as the Late Bronze Age collapse in the Eastern Mediterranean, did not constitute a single event, but a series of regional breakdowns affecting palace economies, long-distance trade systems, and administrative structures. Archaeology and textual evidence demonstrate that while some states disappeared entirely, others transitioned into new political formations. The period concludes with the rise of Iron Age polities that shaped the next millennium. Around 1200 BC, several interconnected Bronze Age powers faced instability. The Hittite Empire in Anatolia, a major state centered at Hattusa, experienced a rapid decline. Archaeological layers at Hattusa show destruction and abandonment by approximately 1180 BC. The causes are complex, involving internal political fragmentation, food shortages documented indirectly through paleoclimate data, and incursions by groups from surrounding regions. The loss of the Hittite administrative center led to the disappearance of centralized authority in much of Anatolia. Smaller Neo-Hittite states later emerged in southeastern Anatolia and northern Syria, continuing some cultural traditions. In the Aegean, the Mycenaean palace centers, including Pylos, Tiryns, Mycenae, and Thebes, suffered destruction around 1200 to 1150 BC. Linear B administrative tablets cease after this period, indicating the end of palace bureaucracy. Archaeological evidence shows that some settlements continued in reduced form while others were abandoned. The collapse disrupted trade networks that had previously linked the Aegean to Cyprus, the Levant, and Egypt. Population movements occurred within Greece, and settlement patterns shifted towards smaller, fortified sites. The subsequent period, sometimes referred to as the Greek Early Iron Age or the Proto-Geometric period, continued to develop through 1000 BC and laid the foundations for the later rise of Greek city-states. Cyprus, a major copper exporter in the Bronze Age, also experienced disruptions. Destruction layers at sites such as Enkomi and Kidion indicate significant upheaval around the same time as mainland centers. Yet Cyprus remained a key node for metallurgical production and continued to influence Eastern Mediterranean trade systems into the Iron Age. In the Levant, coastal and inland cities faced varying degrees of decline. Ugarit, a major center with extensive cuneiform archives, was destroyed around 1190 BC, as evidenced by burnt layers and abandoned administrative tablets left unbaked in process. Letters found in Ugarit's final levels describe threats from enemy forces at sea, although their identification remains uncertain. Other Levantine cities, including Hazor and Megiddo, show destruction layers during this century, though in some cases occupation continued afterward. Egypt provides written records documenting external pressures during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC. Inscriptions from the reigns of Merneptah, circa 1213 to 1203 BC, and Ramesses III, circa 1186 to 1155 BC, reference conflicts with groups arriving by land and sea. These groups, commonly referred to in modern scholarship as the Sea Peoples, appear in Egyptian reliefs as diverse contingents rather than a single unified population. While Egypt repelled major incursions, the broader Eastern Mediterranean system continued to weaken. After the New Kingdom's 20th dynasty, Egypt itself entered a period of political fragmentation known as the Third Intermediate Period. In Mesopotamia, the collapse was less severe than in the Mediterranean, but still significant. The Kassite dynasty in Babylon, which had ruled for several centuries, fell around 1155 BC, following incursions by the Elamites. The political landscape was fragmented, and power shifted among Babylon, Assyria, and Elam. Assyria, in particular, began its rise as a major power during the 11th and 10th centuries BC. Although Assyria experienced setbacks due to internal instability and external threats, it later reorganized into the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which would dominate the Near East by the 9th century BC. In the Iranian Plateau and South Asia, transitions occurred within established regional cultures. In the Indus region, the mature Harappan decline had already taken place earlier, around 1900 BC, but during this period, new cultural configurations formed, including the painted gray ware culture in northern India by around 1100 to 900 BC. These groups practiced mixed farming and pastoralism and established fortified settlements. Textual traditions in the region, such as portions of the Rig Veda, are believed to have been composed during this broader time frame, though their exact chronology remains debated. In China, the transition between the late Shang dynasty and the early Zhou dynasty occurred during this period. The Shang dynasty, based at Anyang, ended around 1046 BC, following the Zhou conquest. Oracle bone inscriptions provide substantial evidence of late Shang political organization, warfare, and ritual life. The early Zhou established a new political order characterized by delegated authority to regional leaders, forming a feudal-like system. Archaeological remains from early Zhou sites include bronze ritual vessels, weaponry, and evidence of expanding settlement patterns. Technological developments during this period were substantial. Iron metallurgy began to spread across several regions, though initially in limited quantities. The precise origins of ironworking remain debated, but evidence from Anatolia, the Near East, and parts of the Caucasus suggests that small-scale iron production may have begun by the late 2nd millennium BC. Widespread adoption occurred later, yet the foundations were laid during this period of transition. Trade networks were disrupted but not eliminated. While long-distance exchange decreased sharply in some regions after 1200 BC, local and regional trade persisted. Pottery styles evolved, and new ceramic traditions emerged. In the Aegean, the appearance of proto-geometric pottery marks a reorganization of production. In the Levant, Phoenician coastal cities such as Tyre and Sidon expanded maritime activity during the later centuries of this segment, laying foundations for Iron Age trade networks across the Mediterranean. Agricultural practices have also adapted. With the decline of palace-controlled economies, communities in Greece and the Levant shifted to smaller-scale household agriculture. In Mesopotamia, irrigation-based farming continued, though political instability affected labor organization. In Egypt, decentralization led to regional variations in agricultural management but maintained continuity in farming practices along the Nile. By 800 BC, the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds had reorganized into new configurations. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was increasing in strength. The Phoenician city-states were becoming major maritime powers. In Greece, population growth and settlement expansion marked the beginning stages of the Archaic period. In Italy, early Villanovan cultures developed, forming the basis for later Etruscan and Roman societies. Across many regions, iron tools and weapons became more common, signaling the onset of the Iron Age. Between 800 and 500 BC, human societies across Eurasia, North Africa, and parts of South Asia underwent structural transformations shaped by the increasing use of iron, the rise of territorial states, intensified warfare, expanding trade networks, and new political experiments. This period marks the consolidation of Iron Age technologies and the emergence of philosophical and institutional developments that influenced later civilizations. While the specific trajectories differed by region, the archaeological and textual record demonstrates widespread changes in governance, social organization, and economic systems. Metal production and use shifted significantly during this period. Iron, although known earlier, became widely adopted between 900 and 700 BC and was firmly established across many societies by 800 BC. Iron tools, particularly plowshares, sickles, and axes, improved agricultural productivity. In regions such as Greece, the Levant, India, and China, iron blades were more durable and accessible than bronze tools because iron ore was more widely distributed than tin. The proliferation of iron weapons, including swords, spears, and arrowheads, influenced military organization and tactics. Iron technology did not immediately eliminate bronze production. Rather, both metals were used concurrently, with gradual transitions in different regions. In the Near East, the Neo-Assyrian Empire became the dominant power. Beginning in the 9th century BC and expanding through the 8th and 7th centuries BC, Assyria developed a centralized and militarized state based in northern Mesopotamia. Kings such as Tiglath-Pileser III, r. 745 to 727 BC, Sargon II, r. 722 to 705 BC, Sennacherib, r. 705 to 681 BC, and Ashurbanipal, r. 668 to 627 BC, implemented administrative reforms, established provincial systems, and built extensive road networks to support imperial communication. Assyrian armies used iron weapons, chariots, cavalry units, and siege technologies. Assyria controlled territories from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, with administrative centers in Nineveh, Nimrud, and Khorsabad. Reliefs from palace complexes depict military campaigns, tribute collections, and construction projects, providing detailed evidence of state power. The Neo-Babylonian Empire succeeded the Assyrians following their collapse in 612 BC. Under rulers such as Nabopolassar, r. 626 to 605 BC, and Nebuchadnezzar II, r. 605 to 562 BC, Babylon became a major political and cultural center. Nebuchadnezzar II expanded the city, constructing monumental walls, temples, and canals. Babylonian astronomical records from this period are among the most detailed in the ancient world, documenting planetary movements and calendrical calculations. While Mesopotamian political power fluctuated, urban life, craft production, and scholarly traditions continued. In the Levant, the Phoenician city-states, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and others, expanded maritime trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. Phoenician merchants transported timber, metal, textiles, glass, and purple dye. Their shipbuilding techniques and navigational experience facilitated trade routes reaching as far as Spain and North Africa. Around 800 to 700 BC, Phoenicians established colonies including Carthage, Gader, Cadiz, and settlements in Sicily, Sardinia, and Malta. The Phoenician writing system, a consonantal alphabet, influenced later Greek and Latin alphabets. In Greece, the period between 800 and 500 BC witnessed the rise of the polis, or city-state. Population growth, increased agricultural output, and wider use of iron tools shaped settlement expansion. Greek city-states developed distinct political systems, including oligarchies, monarchies, and early forms of participatory governance. The formation of hoplite infantry, citizen soldiers equipped with iron weapons and shields, contributed to political change as military participation became linked with civic rights. Colonization expanded Greek cultural presence across the Mediterranean and Black Sea. Settlements such as Massalia, Marseille, Syracuse, and Byzantium were founded during this era. This period also includes the early evolution of philosophical traditions in Greece. Thinkers such as Thales, Anaximander, and Heraclitus, active between the 6th and early 5th centuries BC, investigated natural phenomena and laid the foundations for later scientific and philosophical inquiry. While outside the administrative and military developments of the Iron Age, these intellectual changes form part of the broader transformation of social systems during this period. In Italy, society transitioned toward a more complex organization. The Villanovan culture, dominant from around 900 to 700 BC, developed into early Etruscan city-states. Archaeological evidence shows elite burials, metalwork, and imported goods from Greece and the Near East. The Etruscans established urban centers such as Veii, Tarquinia, and Cerveteri. Their political systems and cultural practices influenced early Rome, which was developing from a cluster of villages into a structured community by the 7th century BC. Archaeological layers from Rome's Forum area show the construction of communal spaces and drainage systems during this period. In South Asia, the Iron Age corresponds to the emergence of new cultural and political structures. The painted gray where culture, dating between 1200 and 600 BC, expanded across the Indo-Gangetic Plain. Settlements increased in size and complexity, featuring iron tools, fortified structures, and increasing agricultural productivity. By around 600 BC, several early states, known as Mahajanapadas, had formed, including Magadha, Kosala, and Kuru. Textual traditions such as portions of the Upanishads and early Buddhist teachings emerged slightly later, but their intellectual roots lie within this era of social transition. In China, the Western Zhou dynasty, c. 1046 to 771 BC, established a decentralized political system based on hereditary territories granted to allied families. Bronze ritual vessels, inscribed with clan names and dedications, provide extensive evidence of the Zhou political structure. After 771 BC, the capital moved east to Luoyang, marking the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period, 771 to 256 BC. The early phases of the Eastern Zhou, known as the Spring and Autumn period, saw the rise of regional states such as Qi, Jin, Chu, and Qin. These polities expanded through warfare, administrative reforms, and agricultural development. Iron tools entered use during the later part of this period, supporting increased agricultural yields. The intellectual foundations for Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism developed in the centuries following 600 BC, but emerged from this environment of political change. Across Africa, several regions demonstrated increasing social complexity. In Nubia, the Kingdom of Kush, centered at Napata, emerged after the decline of the New Kingdom in Egypt. Kushite rulers established their own political structures, engaged in long-distance trade, and constructed burial mounds and temples. By the 8th century BC, Kush became a major regional power and later ruled Egypt as the 25th dynasty, starting in 747 BC. In West Africa, ironworking began to appear during this general time frame. The Nok culture in present-day Nigeria, dated between 1000 and 300 BC, represents one of the earliest sub-Saharan societies to produce iron tools and distinctive terracotta sculptures. Trade expanded across regions. Overland and maritime routes linked the Mediterranean, Near East, and South Asia. Caravans transported spices, metals, textiles, and grain. The Silk Road was not yet established, but precursor routes connected Central Asian steppe groups with China and the Near East. These exchanges facilitated the movement of tools, ideas, and technologies. By 500 BC, the Iron Age had transformed political and economic systems across multiple continents. Empires such as Assyria and early Persia shaped the Near East. City-states dominated the Mediterranean world. In China, regional states competed for dominance, while in South Asia, early states consolidated along the Ganges Plain. Iron tools enabled agricultural expansion, and new social institutions emerged across diverse regions. Between 600 and 200 BC, multiple regions across Eurasia experienced profound transformations in intellectual life, political organization, religious tradition, and administrative systems. This period, often referred to in scholarship as the Axial Age, saw the emergence of influential philosophical and religious teachings within societies undergoing state expansion, urban growth, and intensified interregional interaction. While these developments occurred independently in different regions, they collectively shaped the long-term trajectories of subsequent civilizations. In eastern China, the later Spring and Autumn period, ending in 481 BC, transitioned into the Warring States period, c. 475 to 221 BC. During these centuries, several regional states, Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin, competed for territory and political dominance. Expanding populations, increased agricultural productivity, and administrative reforms created conditions for new intellectual traditions. Confucius, Kongzi, active in the 6th to early 5th century BC, taught principles related to ethical conduct, social hierarchy, governance, and ritual order. Although Confucius did not establish a formal school during his lifetime, his followers compiled his teachings into texts that circulated widely. Other philosophical traditions arose in the same period. Early Taoist ideas, associated with figures such as Laozi, and texts including the Deideging, emphasized governance through minimal intervention and understanding of natural order. Legalist thinkers, including Shang Yang and Han Fei, argued for strong centralized authority, codified laws, and rewards and punishments to maintain state stability. These differing viewpoints reflected the political fragmentation of the Warring States period, during which rulers sought effective strategies for governance and control. Military treatises also emerged, most notably Sun Tzu's The Art of War, composed between the late 6th and 4th centuries BC, which addressed strategy and statecraft. In South Asia, the period between 600 and 200 BC marked the formation of large territorial states, known as the Mahajanapadas. Among them, Magadha grew increasingly powerful. The Ganges Plain supported agricultural expansion through iron tools, improved irrigation, and expanding urban centers. This environment provided the setting for major religious and philosophical movements. Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, lived during the 6th and 5th centuries BC. His teachings focused on the causes of suffering, the nature of existence, and paths toward ethical living and mental discipline. Buddhist communities, organized as monastic institutions, spread across northern India during subsequent centuries. Jainism, associated with Mahavira, also developed during this period, emphasizing nonviolence, ascetic practice, and moral discipline. Political consolidation continued through the early Mauryan Empire. Chandragupta Maurya founded the dynasty around 321 BC, and his grandson Ashoka, r.c. 268 to 232 BC, expanded the empire across the Indian subcontinent. Ashoka's inscriptions, carved on pillars and rocks, represent some of the earliest extensive written records in South Asia. These inscriptions reference moral principles, administrative reforms, and support for religious tolerance. Although Ashoka's rule lies near the end of this segment, the intellectual and political foundations of the Mauryan state emerged earlier, during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. In the Near East, the Achaemenid Persian Empire became one of the most expansive and administratively sophisticated polities of the ancient world. Founded by Cyrus the Great in 559 BC, the empire rapidly expanded to include regions from Anatolia and Egypt to Central Asia and the Indus Valley. Persian administrative systems relied on satrapies, provincial units governed by appointed officials, and extensive road networks, such as the Royal Road connecting Susa and Sardis. The empire employed standardized taxation, used Aramaic as an administrative language, and maintained large archives documenting economic and legal transactions. Persian religious traditions, including the teachings associated with Zoroastrianism, developed during earlier centuries but influenced Achaemenid ideology. While the precise dating of Zoroaster is debated, many scholars place him before 600 BC. The emphasis on cosmic order, moral dualism, and ethical conduct became influential in Persian statecraft. Literary and archaeological evidence from Persepolis, Pasargadae, and other sites demonstrates organized labor systems, monumental architecture, and iconographic programs supporting imperial authority. In Greece, the period between 600 and 200 BC saw major political and intellectual developments. By the 6th century BC, Greek city-states, including Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Miletus, had established distinct political systems. Athens underwent significant reforms under leaders such as Solon in the early 6th century BC and Cleisthenes around 508 BC, which expanded political participation among citizens. The Persian Wars of the early 5th century BC, particularly the battles of Marathon for 90 BC, Thermopylae for 80 BC, and Salamis for 80 BC, strengthened interpolis alliances and influenced political evolution. The classical period, 5th to 4th centuries BC, produced major philosophical figures, including Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Greek advances in mathematics, medicine, drama, and historiography also emerged during this period. Herodotus and Thucydides wrote detailed historical accounts. Hippocrates contributed to systematic medical observation, and Euclid codified mathematical principles. In the 4th century BC, Macedon rose to dominance under Philip II and his son Alexander III, known as Alexander the Great. Between 334 and 323 BC, Alexander conquered the Persian Empire and extended Greek influence into Egypt, the Near East, Central Asia, and parts of South Asia. After Alexander's death, his generals established Hellenistic kingdoms, including the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt, and the Antigonid Kingdom in Macedon. These states blended Greek and local traditions in administration, art, and education. Centers such as Alexandria became important sites of scientific research, featuring institutions such as the Library of Alexandria and the Museum. In the Western Mediterranean, the Italian peninsula saw increasing political complexity. The Etruscan city-states continued to influence Roman institutions, art, and engineering. By the 6th century BC, Rome had developed into a city with significant public architecture. The traditional date for the founding of the Roman Republic is 509 BC, marking the shift from monarchic to republican governance. Early Roman institutions, including the Senate and popular assemblies, shaped legislative and military organization. During the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, Rome expanded its territory through conflicts with neighboring peoples such as the Samnites and Etruscans. In the Levant, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah existed during earlier centuries. But this period corresponds to later phases of their histories, including interactions with Assyria, Babylon, and Persia. Hebrew prophetic traditions, recorded in later textual compilations, developed across these centuries, articulating ethical, social, and religious teachings that influenced the region's cultural history. Across Central Asia and the Eurasian steppe, nomadic groups, including Scythians and Saka, expanded their influence. Their mobility, horse-based warfare, and metalworking traditions shaped interactions between sedentary states and nomadic confederations. Archaeological evidence includes burial mounds, kurgans, containing weapons, horse equipment, and gold ornaments. By 200 BC, major cultural and political systems were firmly established across Eurasia. China was moving toward unification under the Qin. The Mauryan Empire remained a major power in South Asia. The Hellenistic kingdoms dominated the eastern Mediterranean, and Rome was emerging as a significant force in the Western Mediterranean. Philosophical, religious, and legal traditions developed during this period continued to influence societies for millennia. Between 200 BC and 500 AD, large-scale empires reshaped political, economic, and cultural systems across Eurasia and North Africa. This era saw the consolidation of long-distance networks, the expansion of literacy and administration, and the formation of enduring legal and institutional frameworks. The Roman Empire in the Mediterranean and the Han Empire in China were the most extensive political structures of this period, but significant developments also occurred in the Iranian Plateau, the Indian subcontinent, Central Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. The archaeological, textual, and material records provide detailed evidence for the scale and organization of these imperial systems. In the Mediterranean world, the Roman Republic entered a period of territorial expansion during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. After defeating Carthage in the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, Rome consolidated control over the Western Mediterranean and extended influence into Greece, Asia Minor, and the Near East. Internal political conflict intensified as Roman elites competed for power. The civil wars of the 1st century BC, including the conflict between Caesar and Pompey, 49 to 45 BC, undermined the republican structure. In 27 BC, Octavian received the title Augustus, marking the establishment of the Roman Empire. Imperial administration relied on a provincial system governed by appointed officials, supported by extensive road networks, standardized legal systems, and organized taxation. Urban centers expanded across the empire, with Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and Carthage serving as major hubs of commerce and governance. Public infrastructure, including aqueducts, harbors, paved roads, and administrative buildings, demonstrates the scale of Roman engineering. At its territorial height under Trajan, 98 to 117 AD, the Roman Empire stretched from Britain to the Persian Gulf. Latin served as the administrative language in the West, while Greek dominated in the East. Trade routes linked the empire to regions as distant as India, East Africa, and Central Asia. In East Asia, the Han Dynasty, 206 BC, 220 AD, consolidated imperial governance following the short-lived Qin dynasty. Han rulers standardized currency, weights, and measures, expanded agricultural colonization, and maintained a bureaucratic system that selected officials based on examination and merit. State monopolies in salt and iron, alongside agricultural taxation, supported the imperial economy. Territorial expansion extended Chinese influence into the Gansu Corridor, northern Vietnam, and parts of the Korean Peninsula. Internal instability, external pressure from nomadic groups, and court conflicts contributed to the Han collapse in 220 AD. The subsequent Three Kingdoms period, 220 to 280 AD, saw political fragmentation but continued economic and technological activity. Connections between the Roman and Han empires occurred primarily through intermediaries. The Parthian Empire, 247 BC, 224 AD, and later the Sasanian Empire, 224 to 651 AD, controlled major routes across the Iranian Plateau and Central Asia. These states mediated trade in silk, textiles, metals, glassware, and luxury goods. Chinese sources refer to the Roman Empire as Qin, indicating indirect awareness. Although there was no sustained direct diplomacy between Rome and China, Archaeological finds, including Roman glass in China and Chinese silk in Mediterranean contexts, confirm long-distance exchange. In the Indian subcontinent, the period following the Mauryan decline saw regional consolidation and cultural diversity. In the northwest, Indo-Greek, Indo-Scythian, and Indo-Parthian polities emerged due to interactions between South Asia and Central Asia. The Kushan Empire, established by the Yuezhi in the 1st century AD, controlled territories from Bactria to northern India. Kushan rulers facilitated trade along the Central Asian corridors and supported Buddhist institutions. The Gandhara region produced distinctive Buddhist sculpture that integrated South Asian themes with Hellenistic artistic elements. In peninsular India, the Satavahana dynasty governed parts of the Deccan, while Tamil polities, the Chera, Chola, and Pandya kingdoms established commercial networks across the Indian Ocean. Roman coins found in southern India attest to substantial trade. Texts such as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, 1st century AD, describe exchange routes linking Red Sea ports, Arabia, and the Indian coastline. On the Iranian plateau, the Parthian Empire competed with Rome for influence in Mesopotamia and Armenia. Its decentralized governance contrasted with the more centralized Sasanian Empire that replaced it in 224 AD. The Sasanians developed extensive irrigation systems, fortified cities, and bureaucratic institutions. Their religious system, based on Zoroastrian traditions, shaped legal and administrative practices. Conflicts between Rome and the Sasanians throughout the 3rd to 5th centuries AD played a major role in shaping regional boundaries. In Africa, the kingdom of Aksum emerged as a prominent power by the 1st century AD. Aksumite inscriptions, minted coinage, and monumental stelae demonstrate centralized authority and economic integration. Aksum participated in Red Sea and Indian Ocean trade networks, exporting ivory, gold, and agricultural goods. Contacts with the Roman Empire and Arabia are documented in archaeological and textual sources. West Africa saw continued development of ironworking traditions, with the Nok culture producing terracotta sculptures and iron tools between 500 BC and 200 AD. In Europe outside Roman control, Celtic-speaking groups dominated regions from Iberia to Central Europe. The Latine cultural horizon, c. for 50 BC, 50 AD, influenced metalwork, ceramics, and social organization. Germanic groups expanded and formed tribal confederations. Interactions with Rome involved trade, warfare, and migration. In northern Eurasia, nomadic groups such as the Sarmatians and early Huns played significant roles in steppe politics and long-distance networks. In the eastern Mediterranean, religious and cultural developments reshaped regional identities. In Judea, the Second Temple period continued until the Roman destruction of the Temple in 70 AD during the First Jewish-Roman War. Early Christian communities formed in the 1st century AD and expanded throughout the Roman world over the next 3 centuries. Christian texts circulated among urban centers, supported by networks of teachers, scribes, and congregations. Christianity gained legal recognition in 313 AD under Constantine and became increasingly integrated into imperial administration. The Roman Empire entered a prolonged phase of instability during the 3rd century AD. Economic pressures, civil conflicts, epidemics, and military threats challenged imperial cohesion. Administrative reforms under Diocletian, beginning in 284 AD, reorganized the empire into eastern and western halves. After Constantine's reign, the eastern and western divisions became permanent in 395 AD. The Western Roman Empire faced increasing pressure from migrating groups, including Goths, Vandals, and Huns. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD traditionally marks its end. The Eastern Roman Empire, later termed the Byzantine Empire, continued with its capital at Constantinople. By 500 AD, Afro-Eurasian societies were shaped by centuries of imperial expansion, administrative complexity, expanding trade networks, and cultural transformation. Legal systems, urban institutions, and intellectual traditions developed during this period continued to influence later civilizations. Between 300 and 900 AD, societies across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia underwent far-reaching political, cultural, and religious transformations. This period, historically identified as late antiquity and the early Middle Ages, includes the consolidation of major world religions, the reconfiguration of Mediterranean and Near Eastern political systems, the rise of powerful steppe confederations, and the growth of new states in Africa, South Asia, East Asia, and Europe. The archaeological and textual records show both continuity with earlier imperial structures and the formation of new political and cultural identities. In the Mediterranean world, the Eastern Roman, Byzantine, Empire and the remnants of the Western Roman institutions formed the basis for political developments after 300 AD. Constantine legalized Christianity in 313 AD and transferred the imperial capital to Constantinople in 330 AD. The Western Roman Empire faced intensifying military and economic pressures, and regional autonomy increased as imperial authority weakened. The Goths, Vandals, Suebi, Burgundians, and other groups migrated into Roman territories during the 4th and 5th centuries. The Western Empire formally ended in 476 AD with the deposition of Romulus Augustulus. However, Roman law, administrative practices, and cultural traditions persisted in many successor states, including the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, the Visigothic kingdom in Iberia, and the Frankish polities in Gaul. The Eastern Roman Empire remained a significant power, controlling the Balkans, Anatolia, the Levant, and Egypt. Its administrative systems, taxation structures, and legal traditions continued Roman institutions with adaptations for changing political conditions. The reign of Justinian, 527 to 565 AD, included codification of Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, military campaigns in Italy and North Africa, and major construction projects such as Hagia Sophia. Despite these achievements, pandemic outbreaks, including the Justinianic plague beginning in 541 AD, reduced population levels and constrained economic capacity. Across the Middle East and North Africa, the rise of Islam reshaped political and cultural landscapes. Muhammad, active in the early 7th century, established a religious and social movement in the Arabian Peninsula. Following his death in 632 AD, the Rashidun Caliphate expanded rapidly. By 661 AD, Islamic governance extended across the Arabian Peninsula, the Levant, Egypt, parts of North Africa, and Persia. The Umayyad Caliphate, 661 to 750 AD, based initially in Damascus, advanced further into North Africa, Iberia, and Central Asia. Arabic became the administrative language across these regions, and coinage, taxation, and legal practices were standardized. The Abbasid Caliphate, established in 750 AD with its capital at Baghdad, became a major center of intellectual, scientific, and commercial activity. The translation of Greek, Persian, and Indian texts, the development of mathematical and astronomical studies, and the growth of urban markets characterized Abbasid economic and cultural consolidation. The postal and road systems maintained communication across the caliphal territories, reflecting continuity with earlier Persian administrative traditions. In Persia, the Sasanian Empire, 224 to 651 AD, continued to influence regional politics until the Arab-Muslim conquests. Sasanian administrative structures, military organization, and Zoroastrian institutions shaped the territories of Mesopotamia, Iran, and Central Asia. The fall of the Sasanians in the 7th century marked the end of one of the major political systems of late antiquity. In South Asia, the Gupta Empire, c. 320 to 550 AD, formed a significant political and cultural center in northern India. The Gupta rule supported Sanskrit literature, mathematics, astronomy, and temple architecture. Texts associated with scholars such as Aryabhata demonstrate developments in algebra and astronomical calculation. After the Gupta decline in the mid-6th century, regional states emerged, maintaining cultural and economic continuity. Buddhism remained influential in northern India and Central Asia, supported by monastic networks and patronage from regional rulers. In southern India, early Chola, Chera, and Pandya states expanded agricultural production, maritime trade, and temple construction. In Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean trade contributed to the rise of early states, including Funan, 1st to 6th centuries AD, in the Mekong Delta and Srivijaya, emerging in the 7th century. These polities participated in maritime networks linking India, China, and the Middle East. Archaeological evidence, including inscriptions, imported ceramics, and urban settlement remains, documents early forms of political centralization and religious exchange. In China, the fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 AD led to political division, but significant developments occurred during the subsequent periods. The Jin Dynasty briefly unified northern and southern China, but internal conflict and external pressure led to the division of the north among non-Han regimes collectively known as the 16 Kingdoms, followed by the northern dynasties. In southern China, the eastern Jin and subsequent southern dynasties governed from Jiankong. Buddhism expanded significantly during these centuries, transmitted along Central Asian routes and adopted by rulers and urban populations. The Sui dynasty, 581 to 618 AD, reunified China, re-establishing centralized authority, building infrastructure, and reforming administrative systems. The subsequent Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 AD, oversaw major developments in statecraft, urbanization, and interregional diplomacy. Chang'an became one of the world's largest cities, connected to Central Asia, Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia through diplomatic and commercial exchanges. The Tang tributary system formalized interstate relations in East Asia. Across Central Asia and the Eurasian steppe, nomadic confederations played major political and military roles. The Huns influenced European and Central Asian politics during the 4th and 5th centuries. Later groups, including the Gokturks, 6th to 8th centuries, established steppe empires that controlled trade routes and interacted with Chinese, Persian, and Byzantine states. These confederations maintained mobility-based economies supported by horse pastoralism and long-distance networks. In Africa, multiple regions experienced state formation and economic development. In Northeast Africa, the Kingdom of Aksum expanded its control over the Red Sea trade and minted inscriptions and coinage documenting its political authority. Aksumite rulers adopted Christianity in the 4th century under King Izana. Farther west, the emergence of early states in the Sahel, including Ghana, c. 700 to 900 AD, reflected growing control of trans-Saharan trade routes linked to gold, salt, and agricultural production. Archaeological evidence indicates increasing social stratification and craft specialization. In Western and Northern Europe, the post-Roman period saw the formation of new political structures. The Frankish kingdom under the Merovingians developed in Gaul. Anglo-Saxon kingdoms formed in Britain after migrations during the 5th and 6th centuries. Scandinavian societies, though not yet entering the Viking Age, developed hierarchical chiefdoms with specialized craft production and maritime networks. Christianity spread across Europe during this period. Missionary activity expanded in Ireland, Britain, and parts of the Frankish world. Monastic institutions became centers of literacy, administration, and agricultural management. By 900 AD, the political and religious landscapes of Afro-Eurasia had been fundamentally reshaped. Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism formed major cultural networks. The Byzantine Empire, the Islamic Caliphates, the Tang dynasty, and emerging European and African states created the institutional frameworks for the medieval world. Between 900 and 1400 AD, Afro-Eurasian societies experienced significant economic growth, technological innovation, expanding trade networks, and the consolidation of political and intellectual traditions. Although regional trajectories differed, this period forms a coherent phase in global history characterized by increased connectivity, the rise of commercial centers, and the strengthening of states across Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The archaeological and documentary evidence shows clear patterns of intensification in agriculture, manufacturing, long-distance exchange, and administrative systems. In East Asia, the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279 AD, governed one of the most economically and technologically advanced societies of the medieval world. The Northern Song period, 960 to 1127 AD, saw major developments in agricultural productivity due to improved rice strains, irrigation systems, and land management. Population estimates suggest that China's population exceeded 100 million during the 11th century, supported by surplus grain production and expanding markets. Urban centers such as Kaifeng and Hangzhou reached populations in the hundreds of thousands. Technological innovation accelerated. The Song period produced the earliest known printed books using both woodblock printing and movable type. Advances in metallurgy supported the mass production of iron and steel. The widespread use of gunpowder in military and civil applications began during this era, with documented use of gunpowder-based weapons by the 12th century. The Song government operated a monetized economy using copper coins and the world's earliest government-issued paper currency. Maritime activity expanded along the coasts of East and Southeast Asia, with Chinese vessels participating in trade networks reaching as far as the Indian Ocean. In the Islamic world, the period from 900 to 1400 AD included significant political, intellectual, and commercial developments. The Abbasid Caliphate retained cultural influence despite political fragmentation after the 10th century. Regional states, including the Fatimids in Egypt, 909 to 1171 AD, the Seljuks in Persia and Anatolia, 11th to 12th centuries, and later the Mamluks, 1250 to 1517 AD, governed extensive territories while maintaining Arabic as a major language of administration, scholarship, and trade. Islamic urban centers such as Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, Fez, and later Timbuktu became hubs of scientific study, manuscript production, and commercial activity. Scholars produced works in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and geography. Observatories and libraries facilitated systematic research. Maritime and overland trade networks linked the Eastern Mediterranean, Red Sea, Persian Gulf, and Indian Ocean. Goods transported included textiles, ceramics, sugar, paper, metalwork, and spices. These exchange routes connected Africa, the Middle East, Europe, South Asia, and East Asia. In West Africa, major states expanded their control over trans-Saharan trade routes. The Ghana Empire reached its height between the 10th and 11th centuries, controlling gold-producing regions and facilitating exchange with North Africa. After Ghana's decline, the Mali Empire, circa 1230 to 1600 AD, became the dominant power. Under rulers such as Mansa Musa, early 14th century, Mali controlled major trade centers, including Timbuktu and Gao. Gold, salt, leather goods, and agricultural products moved across the Sahara via camel caravans. Islamic scholarship spread in the region, documented by manuscript libraries and accounts from travelers such as Ibn Battuta. East Africa saw the growth of Swahili coastal city-states, including Kilwa, Mombasa, Mogadishu, and Zanzibar. Archaeological evidence indicates complex urban centers with coral stone architecture by the 12th century. These cities engaged in the Indian Ocean trade, exporting ivory, gold, and iron while importing ceramics, textiles, and glassware from China, India, and the Middle East. The diffusion of Islam along the coast occurred gradually through commerce and settlement. In Europe, the period from 900 to 1400 AD included demographic expansion, agricultural intensification, and the rise of feudal and later commercial systems. The introduction of the heavy plow in northern Europe, combined with crop rotation and improved harness technology, increased agricultural output beginning in the 10th and 11th centuries. Population growth led to the expansion of settlements and the development of new towns. The political structure of medieval Europe varied by region. Feudal systems based on land tenure, military obligations, and hierarchical governance shaped rural administration. Monarchies in England, France, and parts of the Iberian Peninsula gradually strengthened centralized authority. The Holy Roman Empire maintained a complex network of principalities, bishoprics, and free cities. The Byzantine Empire, although reduced in size after the 11th century, continued to play a major role in Eastern Mediterranean politics. The Crusades, 1096 to 1291 AD, emerged from political and religious developments in Europe and the Middle East. These expeditions altered trade patterns, military technologies, and political relations between Christian and Muslim polities. Although the Crusader states in the Levant were eventually absorbed by surrounding powers, the long-term consequences included increased European exposure to Mediterranean trade networks and knowledge systems. By the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe experienced notable commercial growth. Italian city-states such as Venice, Genoa, and Florence operated maritime trade networks linking Europe with the Mediterranean, the Levant, and North Africa. Urban guilds regulated the production of textiles, metalwork, and other goods. Universities emerged in Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, institutionalizing scholarly traditions in law, medicine, and theology. The Mongol Empire, 1206 to 1368 AD, reshaped Eurasian connectivity. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongols established the largest contiguous land empire in history, controlling territories from China to Eastern Europe. Mongol rule reorganized administrative structures, promoted caravan security, and facilitated movement along the Silk Roads. The Pax Mongolica of the 13th and early 14th centuries enabled merchants, diplomats, and scholars to travel across Eurasia with relative stability. Chinese, Persian, Arab, and European sources document the widespread exchange of technologies, crops, textiles, and scientific knowledge. In China, the Song dynasty fell to the Mongols in 1279 AD, leading to the establishment of the Yuan dynasty, 1271 to 1368 AD. The Yuan rulers integrated Chinese, Persian, and Central Asian administrative practices. They maintained road systems, postal relay stations, and trade networks. Paper currency circulated widely, though inflation became a recurring issue in the later Yuan period. Across South Asia, regional states expanded agricultural and commercial systems. The Chola Empire in southern India, c. 850 to 1279 AD, built an extensive maritime network linking India with Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and the Persian Gulf. Chola inscriptions and temple architecture document political authority, irrigation development, and military expeditions. In northern India, the Delhi Sultanate emerged in the 13th century, forming a major state that governed large parts of the subcontinent. By 1400 AD, global trade networks spanned the Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, Central Asia, and East Asia. Populations increased across multiple regions, and urban centers grew in size and economic complexity. Agricultural, technological, and intellectual developments during these centuries established the structures that would influence global systems during the era of early modern expansion. Between 1400 and 1700 AD, maritime exploration, commercial expansion, and the formation of overseas empires permanently linked the world's continents. This period marks the transition from regionally connected Old World systems to a global network integrating Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Documentary, archaeological, and navigational evidence provide a detailed record of economic, demographic, and political transformations that reshaped global history. Developments in shipbuilding, cartography, and navigation enabled sustained transoceanic travel, while new trade routes altered long-standing patterns of exchange. In the early 15th century, China conducted major maritime expeditions under the Ming Dynasty. Between 1405 and 1433 AD, fleets commanded by Zheng He traveled to Southeast Asia, India, the Arabian Peninsula, and East Africa. These expeditions involved large ocean-going vessels and extensive logistical systems. Although the Chinese state later reduced such activities, these voyages demonstrated a significant level of maritime capacity and contributed to regional diplomatic and commercial exchange. In Europe, technological advances in navigation, including the magnetic compass, stern-post rudder, improved sails, and revised portal-on charts enabled longer voyages. Iberian states led early Atlantic expansion. Portugal, under the sponsorship of rulers including Henry the Navigator, explored the West African coast beginning in the early 15th century. By 1488 AD, Bartolomé Dias had reached the Cape of Good Hope. The Portuguese sought access to gold, African trade networks, and the Indian Ocean spice markets. Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498 AD, establishing a direct maritime route between Europe and South Asia. Portuguese trading posts and forts were constructed from West Africa to India and Southeast Asia, forming a maritime commercial system. In 1492 AD, Christopher Columbus, sailing for the Spanish crown, reached the Caribbean. This event initiated sustained contact between Europe and the Americas. Spanish expeditions soon expanded into the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, and South America. Between 1519 and 1521 AD, Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire, and between 1532 and 1533 AD, Francisco Pizarro conquered the Inca Empire. These conquests involved military engagements, alliances with local groups, and the spread of Old World diseases, which had severe demographic consequences for indigenous populations. The Columbian Exchange describes the transfer of crops, animals, pathogens, and technologies between the Old World and the New World following 1492 AD. Crops such as maize, potatoes, tomatoes, and cacao moved from the Americas to Afro-Eurasia, increasing global agricultural diversity. In return, wheat, rice, sugarcane, and livestock such as horses, cattle, pigs, and sheep spread across the Americas. Epidemic diseases, including smallpox, measles, and influenza, caused substantial population decline in indigenous societies due to a lack of immunity. This demographic shift had long-term social and economic effects across the Americas. The Atlantic slave trade expanded significantly during this period. Beginning in the mid-15th century and accelerating after 1500 AD, European powers transported enslaved Africans to plantations in the Caribbean, Brazil, and North America. Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, and English traders established networks connecting West and Central Africa with the Americas. Millions of Africans were forcibly moved across the Atlantic between the 16th and 17th centuries. This system formed a major component of early globalization, linking African, American, and European economies through coerced labor, plantation agriculture, and commercial exchange. In the Indian Ocean, Portuguese influence challenged existing trade networks, but did not eliminate them. Muslim merchant communities in Arabia, East Africa, India, and Southeast Asia continued to operate extensive commercial systems. The Ottoman Empire, which controlled significant portions of the Eastern Mediterranean after 1453 AD, remained a major political and economic power. Ottoman territories spanned southeastern Europe, Anatolia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Administrative, fiscal, and military systems supported imperial governance. Istanbul became a major commercial and cultural center linking Europe and Asia. In Africa, several states operated within expanding Atlantic and trans-Saharan networks. West African polities such as Benin, Mali, and Songhai maintained organized administrative systems and facilitated trade in gold, salt, and other commodities. The Songhai Empire, centered on Gao and Timbuktu, reached its height in the 15th and early 16th centuries. Its collapse after Moroccan military campaigns in 1591 AD disrupted regional political structures. Along the East African coast, Swahili city-states continued commercial activity despite Portuguese incursions. In South Asia, the Delhi Sultanate declined during the early 16th century, and the Mughal Empire was established in 1526 AD after Babur's victory at the Battle of Panipat. Under rulers such as Akbar, r. 1556 to 1605 AD, the Mughal Empire consolidated administrative authority across northern India, developed standardized revenue systems, and supported agriculture and commercial production. Mughal urban centers, including Agra, Lahore, and Delhi, became major population centers with significant artistic and architectural achievements. In East Asia, the Ming dynasty governed China until 1644 AD, maintaining large-scale agriculture, manufacturing, and internal trade. Silver from the Americas, transported through Spanish Manila after 1571 AD, entered China through East Asian markets, integrating China into early global monetary systems. In Japan, the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573 AD, transitioned into the Sengoku period, marked by regional military conflict. By the late 16th century, unification processes under Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu prepared the foundation for the Tokugawa shogunate, established in 1603 AD. European maritime powers expanded rapidly during the 16th and 17th centuries. Spain controlled vast territories in the Americas and the Philippines. Portugal maintained outposts across Africa and Asia. Northern European states entered global competition during the 17th century. The Dutch established the Dutch East India Company in 1602 AD and the Dutch West India Company in 1621 AD. These institutions combined military force with commercial operations, influencing trade in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, and the Atlantic. The English founded the English East India Company in 1600 AD, initiating long-term involvement in Indian Ocean commerce and later territorial expansion. Scientific, mathematical, and cartographic knowledge supported these developments. Improved astronomical observations and latitude measurement enabled long-distance navigation. European map-making incorporated information from African, Asian, and indigenous American sources. Printing disseminated geographical knowledge to a wider audience. By 1700 AD, the world's continents were connected through stable maritime routes. Exchange of crops, materials, technologies, and labor reshaped global systems. European states held expanding overseas empires. Asian states managed complex commercial and administrative systems, and African polities engaged in regional and transoceanic trade networks. Early globalization redefined population distributions, economic structures, and cultural interactions. Between 1500 and 1800 AD, major scientific, intellectual, and political developments reshaped global societies. This period includes the scientific revolution, the expansion of early capitalism, major philosophical transformations, and the evolution of new political institutions. Changes in natural philosophy, mathematics, economic systems, and governance laid the foundations for technological modernization and industrialization. Written records, scientific publications, institutional archives, and economic data provide detailed evidence for these transformations. The scientific revolution emerged gradually from earlier European, Islamic, and Asian intellectual traditions. In the early 16th century, Nicholas Copernicus proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system in De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, 1543 AD. His mathematical treatment of planetary motion challenged geocentric models that had dominated European astronomy since antiquity. Although initially limited in impact, Copernicus's work provided the basis for subsequent developments. In the early 17th century, Johannes Kepler formulated 3 laws of planetary motion, 1609 to 1619 AD, demonstrating that planetary orbits were elliptical and could be described using precise mathematical relationships. Galileo Galilei's telescopic observations beginning in 1609 AD, including documentation of the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and lunar surface irregularities, further supported heliocentric principles. Galileo published key findings in Sidereus Nuncius, 1610 AD, and later works. Isaac Newton's Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, 1687 AD, integrated terrestrial and celestial mechanics through universal laws of motion and gravitation. Newton's mathematical formulations established predictive models applicable across natural phenomena. His work, along with contributions from contemporaries such as Robert Hooke, Christian Huygens, and Edmund Halley, formed the core of classical mechanics. Institutional support for scientific activity increased through academies and scientific societies, including the Royal Society of London, founded 1660 AD, and the Académie des Sciences in Paris, founded 1666 AD. These institutions published journals, facilitated correspondence, and standardized experimental practices. Advances in mathematics, including analytic geometry, René Descartes, 1630s, differential calculus, Newton and Leibniz, late 17th century, and probability theory, Pascal and Fermat, expanded analytical capability. Medical and biological knowledge advanced through empirical observation. Andreas Vesalius' De Humani Corporis Fabrica, 1543 AD, provided detailed anatomical illustrations based on human dissection. William Harvey demonstrated the circulation of blood in 1628 AD. Improvements in optical technology allowed scientists such as Robert Hooke and Antony van Leeuwenhoek to observe cells, microorganisms, and microscopic structures. These developments shifted medical theory from classical models toward experimental investigation. During the same period, global economic systems underwent major structural change. Commercial expansion, initiated during the maritime explorations of the 15th and 16th centuries, intensified between 1500 and 1800 AD. Joint stock companies, including the English East India Company, 1600 AD, and the Dutch East India Company, 1602 AD, combined private capital with state authority, operating extensive commercial networks in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. These companies maintained their own armed forces, negotiated treaties, and administered territories. The growth of Atlantic trade, including the forced movement of enslaved Africans, integrated labor, raw materials, and manufactured goods into a transcontinental system. Plantation agriculture in the Caribbean, Brazil, and the southern regions of North America produced sugar, tobacco, cotton, and coffee for global markets. European port cities such as Amsterdam, London, Bristol, and Nantes expanded as financial and commercial centers. Banking institutions, including the Bank of England, 1694 AD, standardized credit systems, supported public finance, and facilitated long-distance investment. In political thought, the 17th and 18th centuries introduced major philosophical frameworks. Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, 1651 AD, described a centralized state founded on social contract principles. John Locke's works on government, 1689 to 1690 AD, advanced ideas of natural rights and limited government. These ideas influenced constitutional developments in Britain, North America, and later Europe. The Enlightenment, spanning the 17th and 18th centuries, emphasized reason, empirical observation, and critiques of traditional authority. Philosophers, including Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Diderot, contributed to debates on governance, religious tolerance, economics, and education. Encyclopedic projects attempted to organize and disseminate knowledge systematically. Enlightenment thought spread through printed books, salons, universities, and scientific societies. State structures evolved during this period. In Western and Central Europe, monarchies strengthened administrative capacity through taxation reforms, standing armies, and legal codification. Examples include France under Louis XIV, reigned 1643 to 1715 AD, and various German principalities within the Holy Roman Empire. In Eastern Europe, the Russian state expanded under rulers such as Peter the Great, reigned 1682 to 1725 AD, who reorganized military institutions and encouraged technological adoption from Western Europe. In the Ottoman Empire, administrative and military reforms attempted to maintain territorial control across Southeast Europe, Anatolia, and the Middle East. Safavid Persia, 1501 to 1736 AD, consolidated Shia Islam as a state tradition and managed a diverse economy integrating agriculture, textiles, and trade. The Mughal Empire in India, 1526 to 1857 AD, maintained extensive agricultural revenues, urban centers, and administrative organization. Under Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, the Mughals supported architecture, literature, and artisanal production. By the late 17th century, however, Mughal administrative pressures and regional autonomy increased. In China, the Ming dynasty administered a large agricultural economy with extensive internal markets. Silver inflows from global trade, especially through Manila after 1571 AD, supported monetary circulation. After 1644 AD, the Qing dynasty expanded territorial control into Xinjiang, Mongolia, and Tibet while maintaining agricultural intensification and population growth. China remained one of the world's most productive economies during this period. In Africa, numerous states participated in global and regional trade. The Congo Kingdom, Benin, Oyo, and other polities managed internal political systems while participating in Atlantic commerce. The Ethiopian Empire maintained diplomatic and commercial ties across the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The Sahelian states, including remnants of Mali and later Songhai successors, continued trans-Saharan trade in salt, gold, and textiles until Moroccan influence reshaped regional balances after the late 16th century. Scientific and intellectual changes supported technological innovation, economic shifts, and emerging political theories. By 1800 AD, global systems incorporated advanced mathematics, physics, cartography, and financial institutions. These developments formed the intellectual and structural foundations for the industrial transformations of the late 18th and 19th centuries. Between 1760 and 1914 AD, economic production, population distribution, transportation, communication, and global political structures underwent systemic transformation. This period, commonly referred to as the Industrial Revolution, includes technological innovations in manufacturing, new energy systems, expanding capitalist markets, and unprecedented changes in urbanization and labor organization. Documentary sources, statistical records, factory archives, and engineering studies provide precise evidence for these developments. The first industrial revolution began in Britain around 1760 AD. Several factors contributed to early industrialization. Abundant coal deposits near navigable waterways, developed commercial networks, secure financial institutions, and agricultural productivity that freed labor for industrial work. Mechanization began in the textile industry. James Hargreaves' spinning jenny, 1764 AD, Richard Arkwright's water frame, 1769 AD, and Samuel Crompton's spinning mule, 1779 AD, increased yarn output dramatically. The power loom, developed by Edmund Cartwright in 1785, accelerated mechanized cloth production. These machines shifted textile manufacturing from dispersed cottage systems to centralized factories. Steam power became central to industrial production. James Watt's improved steam engine, commercialized after 1776 AD, converted thermal energy into mechanical power more efficiently than earlier designs. Steam engines powered pumps, mills, and later locomotives and ships. Coal consumption rose significantly as steam engines spread across industries. Iron production expanded with the development of coke-fueled blast furnaces, enabling mass production of iron rails, machinery, and construction materials. Transportation networks changed rapidly. The first steam-powered railway lines appeared in the early 19th century, beginning with the Stockton and Darlington Railway in 1825 AD and the Liverpool and Manchester Railway in 1830 AD. Railways reduced transportation time, lowered costs, and facilitated national and international markets. In maritime transport, steamships gradually replaced sailing vessels. By the mid-19th century, steam-powered ships crossed the Atlantic regularly, shortening travel time between Europe and North America. Urbanization increased sharply. Census data from Britain show rapid population growth in industrial cities such as Manchester, Birmingham, and Glasgow. Industrial workers lived in dense urban districts near factories. Poor sanitation, long working hours, and hazardous conditions characterized early industrial labor. Parliamentary reports from the 1830s and 1840s document child labor, unsafe machinery, and pollution. Reform legislation, including the Factory Acts, beginning 1833 AD, gradually regulated working hours and improved labor conditions. Industrialization spread beyond Britain during the 19th century. Belgium, France, Germany, the United States, and Japan adopted mechanized manufacturing and modern energy systems. Germany's industrial growth accelerated after unification in 1871 AD. The Ruhr region developed into a major coal and steel center. The United States saw a rapid expansion in railroads, steel production, and mechanized agriculture. By 1900 AD, the United States had become one of the world's largest industrial economies. The Second Industrial Revolution, generally dated to 1870 to 1914 AD, included advances in steelmaking, electricity, chemicals, and mass production techniques. The Bessemer process, 1856 AD, and open hearth furnace methods enabled efficient steel production. Steel replaced iron in construction, shipbuilding, and machinery. Electrical generation and distribution systems expanded after the 1870s. Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla contributed to electrical infrastructure, including power stations and alternating current systems. Chemical industries developed new products, including synthetic dyes, fertilizers, and pharmaceuticals. German chemical firms such as BASF and Bayer led in research and production. The internal combustion engine, developed by Nikolaus Otto, 1876, and later improved by Rudolf Diesel, 1897, enabled new forms of transportation. By the early 20th century, automobile manufacturing began to expand, with Henry Ford's assembly line, 1913, applying mass production techniques on a large scale. Global trade increased. Industrial powers relied on raw materials, cotton, rubber, copper, grain, and petroleum from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Manufactured goods moved in return. Steamships and railways accelerated exchange, while telegraph cables transmitted information rapidly across continents. The first successful transatlantic telegraph cable was completed in 1866, reducing communication time between Europe and North America from weeks to minutes. Markets are integrated globally, linking commodity prices and financial flows across continents. Population growth accelerated worldwide. Europe nearly doubled its population between 1800 and 1900. Improvements in agriculture, including mechanization, crop rotation, and chemical fertilizers, increased the food supply. Medical advances, including smallpox vaccination, developed at the end of the 18th century, reduced mortality. Urban migration increased as industrial sectors expanded. Industrialization contributed to major political changes. European states expanded central administrative capacity through taxation, census systems, public education, and transportation infrastructure. In the United States, industrial expansion accompanied westward settlement and political consolidation. Japan underwent a rapid transformation during the Meiji Restoration beginning in 1868 AD. The Japanese government adopted Western technologies, reorganized military and administrative structures, and built railways, factories, and shipyards. By the early 20th century, Japan had become a significant industrial power. Imperial expansion intensified between 1850 and 1914 AD. European powers, driven by access to resources, strategic competition, and industrial demand, established or expanded colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. The scramble for Africa, roughly 1880 to 1914 AD, saw the rapid partitioning of the continent into European-controlled territories. Colonial administrations reorganized local economies toward export production. Railways and telegraph lines were constructed in colonies, primarily to support resource extraction and administrative control. Social and intellectual movements responded to industrial and political changes. Labor unions formed across Europe and North America, advocating for improved working conditions and rights. Socialist and communist movements developed, drawing on the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, whose Communist Manifesto appeared in 1848 AD. Liberal movements promoted constitutional governance, expanded suffrage, and civil liberties. Nationalist movements intensified in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, contributing to shifting political boundaries. By 1914 AD, Industrialization had transformed global power structures, created mass societies, and integrated world markets. Urban centers housed large populations engaged in industrial and service sectors. Transportation and communication technologies connected regions on an unprecedented scale. These developments formed the structural basis for global conflict and technological acceleration in the 20th century. Between 1914 and 1991, global political, economic, and technological systems experienced transformations unprecedented in scale and intensity. This period includes two world wars, the collapse of European empires, the rise of the United States, and the Soviet Union as superpowers, the nuclear age, the creation of international institutions, and the restructuring of global economic systems. Documentary records, government archives, demographic data, and scientific documentation provide extensive evidence of these developments. The First World War began in 1914 after escalating tensions among European powers, driven by militarization, alliance systems, imperial competition, and nationalist movements. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo triggered a conflict involving the major powers of Europe and their global empires. Industrial technologies, including machine guns, heavy artillery, chemical weapons, and mechanized transport, caused unprecedented casualties. Trench warfare on the Western Front and mobile operations on the Eastern Front defined the conflict's strategic patterns. The war ended in 1918 with the collapse of the German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires. Post-war settlements reconfigured borders and governance systems. The Treaty of Versailles, 1919, imposed territorial changes and reparations on Germany. New states emerged in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. The League of Nations was formed in 1920 to maintain international stability, though its capacity was limited by incomplete membership and a lack of enforcement mechanisms. Economic instability, including the global depression beginning in 1929, weakened democracies and contributed to the rise of authoritarian regimes. In Russia, the revolution in 1917 ended the imperial government. The Bolsheviks, under Vladimir Lenin, established a socialist state following civil war and political consolidation. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, was formally established in 1922. Under Joseph Stalin's leadership beginning in the late 1920s, the Soviet state implemented centralized economic planning, collectivization of agriculture, and rapid industrialization. These policies produced significant industrial output, but caused widespread social disruption and famine. In Europe and Asia, expansionist regimes emerged. Adolf Hitler's National Socialist government in Germany pursued territorial expansion, remilitarization, and anti-Jewish policies codified in laws and enforced through state institutions. In East Asia, Japan expanded its influence after industrial and military modernization in earlier decades. Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931 and launched a full-scale war in China in 1937. Italy, under Benito Mussolini, pursued imperial expansion in Africa. The Second World War began in 1939 when German forces invaded Poland. The conflict rapidly expanded across Europe, North Africa, the Atlantic, and the Pacific. German forces occupied large parts of Europe by 1941. The German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 marked the largest land conflict in history. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 brought the United States into the war. The Holocaust, carried out by the Nazi regime, resulted in the systematic killing of millions of Jews and other targeted groups. Industrial capacity and scientific research became central to wartime strategy. The United States and its allies mobilized large-scale production of aircraft, ships, vehicles, and armaments. The Soviet Union relocated industries eastward to maintain output. Scientific research produced radar, improved medical treatments, and nuclear technology. The Manhattan Project developed the first atomic weapons, used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Germany surrendered in May 1945, and Japan surrendered in September 1945. After 1945, the geopolitical structure shifted dramatically. European powers weakened, while the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as global superpowers. Their competing political and economic systems, liberal democracy and capitalism versus communist one-party rule and state planning, defined the Cold War. Both states expanded military alliances. NATO was formed in 1949, while the Warsaw Pact was formed in 1955. The superpowers engaged in an arms race, producing nuclear weapons and delivery systems. Decolonization accelerated after the war. Between the late 1940s and 1970s, states across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa gained independence. India and Pakistan achieved independence in 1947. Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines followed in subsequent years. In Africa, Ghana became independent in 1957, and numerous states achieved independence in the 1960s. Newly independent states developed varied political systems, facing economic challenges and regional conflicts shaped by Cold War dynamics. Major conflicts occurred within this global framework. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, resulted from competition between Soviet and U.S.-supported governments, ending in an armistice that left the peninsula divided. The Vietnam War escalated after 1964, involving large-scale U.S. military intervention and regional mobilization. In the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli conflict produced multiple wars, including conflicts in 1948, 1956, 1967, and 1973, altering regional boundaries and geopolitical alignments. Scientific and technological progress accelerated. The space race produced advanced rocketry, satellites, and computing systems. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1 in 1957, and Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space in 1961. The United States landed astronauts on the moon in 1969. Advancements in computing led to the development of early integrated circuits, late 1950s, and mainframe computers, 1960s. Medical innovations included antibiotics, vaccines, and organ transplantation. Economic systems reorganized. The Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 established the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, in 1947 facilitated global commerce. Western Europe achieved economic recovery through reconstruction programs, including the Marshall Plan. Japan's post-war economic growth transformed it into a major industrial power by the 1970s. The global economy shifted toward multinational corporations, expanded financial markets, and increased international trade. Social systems also transformed. Urbanization accelerated worldwide. Educational attainment increased, supported by state systems and international development programs. Movements for civil rights, women's rights, and social reform expanded across multiple regions. These movements used legal, political, and organizational methods to challenge discrimination, promote equality, and expand democratic participation. The final decades of the Cold War saw both intensified tension and negotiations. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the superpowers close to nuclear conflict. Arms control agreements, including the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, 1968, and the SALT Treaties, 1972, 1979, attempted to regulate nuclear competition. Economic stagnation in the Soviet Union during the 1970s and 1980s weakened state capacity. Under Mikhail Gorbachev, policies of glasnost and perestroika were introduced after 1985, but internal fragmentation increased. The Cold War ended between 1989 and 1991 as Soviet influence in Eastern Europe collapsed and the USSR dissolved. Germany reunified in 1990. The Soviet Union formally dissolved in December 1991, marking the end of the bipolar geopolitical system that had defined international relations for nearly half a century. Between 1991 and 2025, global systems, political, economic, technological, and cultural, underwent rapid transformation driven by digital technologies, the expansion of the internet, shifts in geopolitical power, and accelerating scientific innovation. This period marks the transition from the industrial and nuclear age into an interconnected digital era in which communication, finance, production, and social organization operate through networked infrastructures. Extensive documentation in scientific literature, economic data, and government records allows a precise reconstruction of these developments. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 ended the bipolar geopolitical structure of the 20th century. 15 independent states emerged from the former Soviet territories. The United States became the principal global military and economic power during the 1990s, influencing international institutions and global markets. NATO expanded to include states of Eastern Europe. Russia underwent a political and economic transition, including privatization initiatives and market restructuring. The global economy shifted toward integration, financial liberalization, and the expansion of multinational corporations. Advances in computing and telecommunications reduced transaction costs and increased the speed of information exchange. The Internet, which had originated from research networks of the 1960s, 1980s, became a public infrastructure during the 1990s. The introduction of the World Wide Web in 1991 and the development of web browsers such as Mosaic, 1993, and Netscape Navigator, 1994, facilitated widespread access to digital information. Commercial use of the Internet grew rapidly. Online retail, digital payment systems, and electronic communication have reshaped business models. Email, search engines, and cloud computing became central tools for administration, education, and commerce. The global number of Internet users increased from fewer than 20 million in the early 1990s to more than 5 billion by the early 2020s. Mobile technologies transformed communication further. The transition from analog to digital cellular networks enabled widespread mobile phone adoption during the late 1990s and early 2000s. The introduction of smartphones, beginning in 2007 with devices integrating computing, telecommunications, and internet functions, accelerated mobile internet use. Mobile applications supported navigation, commerce, social communication, and media distribution. Satellite-based positioning systems made geolocation universally accessible. Scientific and technological innovation expanded across fields. Genomics advanced rapidly after the Human Genome Project, initiated in 1990 and completed in 2003. Improvements in sequencing technologies reduced costs and expanded applications in medicine, agriculture, and biotechnology. Renewable energy technologies, solar photovoltaics, wind power, and battery storage grew in scale and efficiency. Robotics and automation became integrated into manufacturing, logistics, and consumer applications. Artificial intelligence has progressed significantly. Machine learning, neural networks, and language models achieved high performance in pattern recognition, translation, autonomous navigation, and content generation. Large-scale datasets, computing power, and algorithmic improvements enabled AI systems to perform tasks previously limited to human experts. Digital platforms used algorithmic systems for content curation, targeted advertising, and automated decision-making. Globalization intensified during the 1990s and 2000s. Supply chains integrated production across multiple continents, with manufacturing concentrated in East Asia, electronics assembly in East and Southeast Asia, and design and service sectors in Europe and North America. The World Trade Organization, WTO, founded in 1995, formalized global trade rules. China's economic reforms and expansion after the late 1970s accelerated its global integration. China joined the WTO in 2001, becoming a major manufacturer and exporter. By the 2010s, China had become one of the world's largest economies. Regional organizations expanded. The European Union deepened its institutional framework, introducing a common currency, the euro, in 1999. The African Union was formed in 2002, replacing the Organization of African Unity. Trade blocs such as ASEAN and Mercosur strengthened regional cooperation. The early 21st century also experienced major disruptions. The attacks of September 11, 2001, reshaped global security policy, leading to military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Counterterrorism measures influenced international travel, surveillance practices, and diplomatic relations. The financial crisis of 2008 resulted from instability in credit markets and mortgage-backed securities, leading to a global recession. Governments implemented fiscal and monetary interventions to stabilize financial systems. Environmental challenges increased in scale. Scientific assessments documented rising global temperatures, melting ice sheets, and increased frequency of extreme weather events. International agreements such as the Kyoto Protocol, 1997, and the Paris Agreement, 2015, attempted to coordinate global responses to climate change. Renewable energy adoption accelerated, though fossil fuels continued to play a major role in global energy systems. Digital media reshaped cultural and social interaction. Social networking platforms emerged in the mid-2000s and expanded globally. These platforms enabled rapid information dissemination, political mobilization, and new forms of communication. However, they also contributed to challenges involving misinformation, data privacy, and information security. The global circulation of video, audio, and written content transformed cultural production and distribution. Urbanization increased worldwide. Megacities with populations exceeding 10 million expanded across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Infrastructure demands grew, including transportation networks, water systems, and housing. Migration, both internal and international, reshaped demographic patterns. Global health systems faced major tests. Infectious disease outbreaks, including SARS, 2003, H1N1 influenza, 2009, Ebola, 2014 to 2016, and COVID-19, 2019 to 2021, demonstrated the vulnerability of interconnected populations. The COVID-19 pandemic caused widespread mortality, economic disruption, and changes in work, education, and transportation patterns. Governments implemented public health measures including quarantine, vaccination campaigns, and digital contact tracing. Between 2010 and 2025, digital technologies continued to expand. Cloud computing, 5G telecommunications, and advanced robotics entered the industrial and consumer sectors. Artificial intelligence supported automation, scientific research, and decision-making systems. Biotechnology advanced through gene editing tools such as CRISPR-Cas9, enabling targeted genetic modification for medical and agricultural applications. Global scientific collaboration increased through digital platforms and open-access datasets. Geopolitical competition shifted toward technology, trade, and regional influence. The United States, China, the European Union, Russia, and emerging economies shaped international systems through economic policy, technological development, and diplomatic initiatives. Cybersecurity became a major concern as states and non-state actors engaged in digital espionage, infrastructure attacks, and information operations. By 2025, the world had transitioned into a fully interconnected digital environment. Communication systems operate at a global scale. Economic systems link production, finance, and consumption across continents. Scientific and technological innovation accelerated rapidly. While major challenges persisted, including inequality, climate change, geopolitical conflict, and governance of digital technologies, the period from 1991 to 2025 marked the formation of a global information society with unprecedented capacity for communication, computation, and data-driven decision-making.